The Reluctant Billionaire. A clean secret celebrity billionaire romance. Written by Cristina Ryan. Narrated by Amelia Mendes.
Chapter 1. Who would have thought that reinventing oneself would be such a challenge? 33-year-old Shawn Henderson wandered barefoot along the shiny, diamond-patterned coastline. He focused on the horizon, his brows furrowed in deep thought as he pondered his latest work in progress. For the past week, he'd been at work on a novel, his first romance story. But he hadn't gotten past the first page. He was used to penning science fiction, so his current story was foreign territory to him. His books sold well, and he had enjoyed a modest lifestyle for the past few years, having earned a New York Times best-selling status. And because he liked his privacy, he worked under a pen name for his science fiction series. But with this new genre, his fan base might not be forgiving. They preferred action, time travel, aliens, and robots. The unexplained phenomena. According to Misty, his publisher, it was time for a change. But Shawn wasn't so sure. The waves rolled out into the ocean, the wet sand receding in the footsteps of the disappearing waves. The sun, in all its fading glory, poured its last bit of light and cast a slice of orange along the shoreline. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Misty. Misty Williams headed one of the top publishing companies, and she lived just a few houses down, making it easy for them to collaborate when necessary. Feeling a bit unconfident about his new career move, he took a deep breath as he answered the call. "Hey, Misty."
You home?
Her voice normally sounded rushed, but it popped like a piece of bubblegum whenever she was excited. Like right now. "I can be in just a few minutes." Though he'd only been gone for maybe 20 minutes at best, and had hoped to spend more time pondering his new future.
Perfect! Can you carve out a little bit of time for your first romance novel?
Yeah, sure. He cleared his throat, hoping she couldn't detect the uncertainty in his voice.
Okay, be there in about 20.
He ended the call. With the sun down, the temperature grew chilly. He started to jog up the shoreline, toward his beach house, located in a private gated retreat in Malibu, with panoramic views of the colony. He purchased the property just short after his 28th birthday, when book 3 of his sci-fi series made the New York Times best-selling list. Offering him the seclusion he needed, the 5,000-square-foot residence was situated in a deep recess, away from the celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres, Tom Hanks, Jennifer Aniston, and Halle Berry. The living room featured huge glass bay windows that he'd covered with thick maroon curtains, which offered him more privacy. But with 5 bedrooms, a granite fireplace, a sunken tub, and many other admirable amenities, he often felt lonely. Stepping into his house, he shut the door, which created a loud echo across the hardwood floors. Shawn glanced at his makeshift office, a high-glass table which sat a few yards away in the living room, next to a small window. He could make out the glow from his laptop. A reminder that his story wanted to be written. A reminder that his dad believed in him, even when he chose a different path. He hung his keys on a wall hook and stepped over to his work area, where he opened a document labeled, The Unintentional Romance. Misty insisted that a dash of humor infused in an otherwise romance novel was just the thing readers were looking for. In the story, the title character, a young flight attendant, finds herself drawn to a young socialite whom she meets when she's on the ground. The story was quite outside of his comfort zone, for genre reasons, but also for personal ones. Namely, his ex-girlfriend. The pain and humiliation Bridget's image triggered were still there, though a vast improvement from the tears that had racked his heart just a few months ago. The doorbell rang, jerking him out of the past. He switched inputs to the video camera and verified that it was Misty. The ocean breeze swept into the room as he swung open the door and welcomed her inside. Misty was petite, with a dark red pixie cut and a wardrobe that consisted solely of 80s vintage clothes. She loved all things 80s and had convinced him to set his sci-fi books in that decade. Misty had been with him through his whole publishing career, so their meetings often mirrored those of two old friends making plans. She tossed her purse into a lone chair next to the door and slid out of her jacket, tossing that next to the purse. Her eyes, though blue, always looked like they were on fire when she was determined. They were on fire right now. "You're going to need a glass of water, aren't you?" he asked her, anticipating a lecture. She grinned and followed him to the kitchen, where she plopped down on one of the bar stools. He handed her the drink and joined her at the bar.
Look, I know that you're not totally on board, and that's why I'm calling a meeting.
She whipped a neon pink fingernail into the air.
But I need you on board, Shawn, if we're going to make this work be, radical.
She spoke in 80s slang, too.
Remember what your dad said when you decided not to join him in his movie rental enterprise?
He scratched his forehead, knowing where this was going. Yes, he said he couldn't be prouder of me for going after my dream of being a writer.
Right? And did he care what genre you wrote in?
No.
He's your biggest supporter, Shawn, you know that.
Shawn shared a particularly close bond with his dad, ever since he was a child. He was the type of dad who spared no expense with his time or money, though Shawn never realized how costly their ventures were until he became an adult. Misty drowned her glass and held it out.
Just one more.
He arched an eyebrow at her.
Okay, maybe two.
He refilled her glass and returned to his seat.
Your dad followed his dreams too, and tell me, how did that pan out for him?
She sipped her water, the fire in her eyes glowing brighter than before as they peeked over the rim of the glass. He's now CEO of Value Cinema, one of the world's largest movie hybrid rental and streaming companies. She set her glass on the bar, then raised another pink fingernail, the silver bangles jangling together as they clattered up and down her arm.
Exactly! He's like a billionaire and never stopped going after his dreams.
You know I don't care about the money.
Totally know that.
She grabbed his arm.
Dreams, Shawn, dreams. That's what I'm getting at. Don't give up on your dreams.
He shrugged, playing with a loose thread on his jeans. What she said made sense, but he couldn't quite feel the passion she was feeling. His sci-fi series had met with great success. What if he failed in the romance genre? When he glanced up, Misty was staring hard at him. He blinked, folded his hands in his lap, and cleared his throat.
Shawn, what's your damage? The romance market is in. It will bring you renewed success, especially as very few male writers write in the genre.
As he reached for his drink, she lightly touched his arm and lowered her voice.
You'd be breaking new ground.
He heaved a sigh as he processed it all. Her job was as much on the line as his. More importantly, she knew the market. You're right. I mean about everything. He cocked his head. You sure you and my dad haven't been working together behind my back? Because he's pretty much been telling me the same thing. She finished the water, smiling.
Only two.
Completely confused, he echoed. Only two? She pointed to her empty glass.
I'm glad you realize I'm right, because if I had to drink a third cup of water, I was going to have to float out of here.
He chuckled as she rose from the bar, slinging her purse over her shoulder. She glanced once more at him, her blue eyes sparkling.
We are about to embark on a tubular ride, Mr. Henderson.
Thanks, Misty. Looking forward to it. Her purse flew behind her like the tail of a kite as she closed the door. He shook his head, a small grin on his face. Aside from the kitchen, the house had become shrouded in shadows. The glow of the moon peeked dimly through the opaque curtains. Making his way into the living room, he felt the ocean breeze whisper across his arms as it fluttered the curtains. He slid into the office chair and wiggled the built-in mouse on the keypad. A handful of folders appeared on the monitor as the screen came to life. He preferred working at night, with just a single lit candle next to his laptop, listening to the sound of waves crashing into the shore through the open window. He lit the squat yellow candle, the scent of vanilla perfuming the air. Sighing, he rolled his chair up to the screen. Page 1, Chapter 1. And the only thing that had happened was that some young woman was looking forward to meeting up with her best friend at the airport, where they would proceed to talk about their favorite TV show and their day at work. Frustrated, Shawn sat back and frowned at the words on the screen.
So, tell me, what was the highlight of your flight? Or who was the highlight? Jane winked at Carrie. Carrie made a gagging gesture. The last thing I need is love. Jane simply smiled at her friend, then spotted a man discreetly looking their way. She tapped Carrie's shoulder. Don't look yet, but there's a gorgeous guy staring at you from around that Mexican restaurant. Used to Jane's tactics to set her up, Carrie rolled her eyes and continued walking out of the airport without even looking at the stranger. But Carrie, he's... Jane ran after her friend.
No. Shawn spoke aloud. This sounds like some creepy, scary movie. Why is the guy staring at her from the shadows? Maybe he should have listened to his dad when he had tried to set him up on dates. At least it would give him a more realistic picture to work with. He pulled his cell phone from his jacket pocket and scrolled to his dad's contact information. Maybe it wasn't too late. He thought back to one of their recent conversations, right here in his living room. Shawn, I was at a business lunch with one of my colleagues the other day. His daughter just finished her master's program. She's a great gal. I got to meet her myself. But Shawn hardly paid attention to a word he was saying. Dad, I think I should come on board. I mean, I attained the bestseller status. What more do I need? I have my degree. I can... His dad stopped him and placed a tender hand on his shoulder, the corners of his mouth lifting the way they always did when he tried to repress a smile. Son, you have made me proud. You have used your gifts and made a living from it. He waved his arm around the room. Look at it all, Shawn. Because of your hard work. Because of your hard work, you have found your place in this world. From the time you were just a boy, banging away on my old typewriter, your mom and I knew you would live your dreams someday. His eyes sparkled, and he drew Shawn into a tight embrace. Even though his dad gave him the green light, he still felt a bit guilty for not hopping on board with him. Before he changed majors, he'd been pursuing a business degree, with the intent of joining his dad's company. But once Shawn started college, his world forever changed. His mom was killed in a terrible car accident. She'd been on her way home from the grocery store when some reckless driver came weaving through traffic and rammed right into her, pushing her car into a light pole. 15 years passed. His dad barely mentioned Shawn's mother, and Shawn found no interest in trying for love again, which is why it surprised him when his dad tried to set Shawn up on dates. His dad was in D.C. for the week, helping his brother, Shawn's uncle Joel, with some lobbying. Exiting out of the novel that he knew he should be writing, with a deadline closing in fast, he started to punch in his dad's number. Maybe a distraction is what he needed to snap out of his writer's block. And maybe it was time to take his advice on dating after all. Before he finished typing the number, the phone lit up, signaling a call from Uncle Joel, his dad's brother. Hey, Uncle Joel. How's it going? I was just getting ready to call my dad. Is he with you right now? Shawn. His voice was usually deep and hearty, but now it came across as a hoarse whisper. That's all he said. Just his name, like he couldn't go on. Hey, are you okay? He heard Joel's shallow breathing, followed by a pause. Shawn, your father passed away. Chapter 2. Shawn grew silent for a moment as confusion wrapped itself around him. Joel had to be wrong. It didn't make sense. No, there had to be some kind of mistake here because his dad couldn't be gone. He just couldn't. Shawn. Joel's voice whispered through the line. You there? I'm here. Only he wasn't. He was 18 again, listening to his dad tell him the news about his mom being hit by another driver, how she was in the ER, how it wasn't looking good. He'd cried so long and so hard over the loss of his mom that he couldn't stand that if his dad had to hold him up. And here he was again, listening to the voice of someone tell him that another parent, a father who had loved and doted on him his entire life, had left this earth. The phone slipped from his grip as he fell to his knees onto the hard floor. Tears struck his face and pounded in his heart. Shawn. Joel's voice carried through the speaker of his phone. Shawn shook his head. His eyes shut tightly as he willed this to all go away. He heard a clicking sound. Joel had hung up. When Shawn woke up, he found himself curled up on the floor, dried tears stuck to his chin. Slowly, he pulled himself into a standing position, his mind numb. The early sunlight fell through the east windows. He crossed to his work table and lit the vanilla-scented candle once more. Not out of inspiration or cheer, but out of an automatic need to ensure a sense of normalcy, the familiarity of routine, and to convince himself that Joel's news was somehow a misunderstanding. He glanced through the small window. The sun, having finished its descent long ago, now left the room in darkness, except for the single flame of the candle whose glow was contained to its wick. Like the dying flame, his heart also sank into shadows. Shawn managed to call Joel back. It turned out that his dad had undergone an emergency bypass surgery when a sudden shortness of breath and tightened chest gave way to a heart attack. "Shawn, it all happened so fast. Johnny seemed fine over the weekend, and then suddenly, he was being rushed to the hospital." There was nothing more to say. He thanked his uncle and hung up, staring at the phone in his hand as though he were staring at a foreign object that didn't belong. As though he were in an abstract reality from one of his sci-fi books, from which he would soon awake. But he was already awake, and the pain was too real.
Chapter 3. The doorbell rang, snapping Shelly Rogers out of her reverie. Her favorite pizza boy, Kyle, held out her favorite pizza.
"How you doing, Miss Rogers?"
She took the box and handed him a tip. "Doing great, Kyle. How's that girl of yours?"
"We'll be getting married. She accepted my proposal."
She set the box on the table behind her and gave him a quick hug. "Oh, I am so happy for you two."
"Apparently, romance isn't dead. That's what she said to me when I asked her to marry me. You should have seen the tears of joy in her eyes, Miss Rogers."
"Kind of like the look you're giving me now?" Smiling from ear to ear, he nodded. She reached into her purse and handed him a $100 bill. His eyes grew wide.
"No, I can't take that."
She tucked it into his hand and closed her fingers around it. "I wish you all the best."
"Oh, Miss Rogers, now you have tears in your eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much."
He hugged her tightly before he hurried toward his car. Surprised, she wiped away a tear as she shut the door. Grabbing her dinner, she stopped at the fridge to get a soda before plopping herself in front of the movie for its finale. The pizza was as cheesy and deliciously rich as ever, and she ended up eating half of it before she realized she'd better leave some for tomorrow. Washing down the pepperoni with the last swish of Pepsi, she wondered at her reaction to Kyle's news. 2 years ago, when Rick announced he was leaving her for a woman he'd met on their anniversary trip that year, she gave up. She stopped eating, stopped watching movies, slept sporadically. Even her dreams had stopped. Everything good, everything she'd ever enjoyed, all came to a halt. She thought she'd never recover. But then the months passed, and she began to find her way out of the pain. Lana, her best friend since grade school, and Brandon, Shelly's brother, reminded her that it was Rick's betrayal, not hers, that he carried the fault, that she was free and he had no power over her. And every day since Rick had left, Shelly reminded herself that God loved her and knew the desires of her heart, that she would find someone who truly treasured her and would be faithful to her. Stuffing the pizza box into the fridge, Shelly shut the door and paused as her eye caught on a small metal box sticking out from one of the higher cabinets. She pulled it down and began to sort through the miscellaneous items. Sticky pads, ballpoint pens, envelopes, photos from high school, and at the bottom, the magnets. There was one from Paris, another from Hawaii, one from Mexico, all the places she and Rick had traveled. She scooped them into her palm and shook her head at them. The marriage had been just a lie. He'd been in love with Jessica for much longer than he'd claimed. She wasn't just a random stranger he met on their 3rd anniversary. They met before he even proposed to Shelly, and their affair started before he even declared his vows to Shelly. As one last heart punch, he told her the whole truth as he packed his bags.
"The thing is, Shelly, you just don't do it for me. I mean, I lavished you with expensive trips and fancy gifts. The size of your wedding ring says it all, but you couldn't be satisfied with any of that."
She stared at the magnets for a second, then she tossed them as hard as she could at the wall. Tears came down, but so did a funny-sounding chuckle. "Shelly, be glad he's gone." They weren't really her words. Lana had spoken them for the past year. But for the first time, she felt like she could actually believe them, feel them, live them. She wiped the tears from her cheek with the sleeve of her shirt, shoved the box back into the cabinet, then disposed of the magnets into the trash can. Goodbye, Rick. She smiled a small, sad smile with an edge of relief. Chapter 4.
Surprisingly, Shawn slept through the night. By the time he awoke, the sun was already seeping through his bedroom window. He had to squint as he pulled aside the blinds. A few yards away, he spotted a family, probably his neighbors, making their way to the shore, surrounded by only a pair of seagulls and the crashing waves. Because of the homeowner's requests for increased privacy, the beach offered limited parking and few public access points, so the beach typically remained seclusive. Normally, he would have taken in the view for a few minutes, sipping on a cup of hot coffee, treasuring the beautiful picture of nature. But there was no joy in his heart, only a deep sense of sorrow. He turned away from the window and crossed the room, making his way to the kitchen. It was an automatic response. He always ate breakfast. When he reached the refrigerator, he paused, his stomach holding no appetite. His eye caught on the coffee table in the living room. His phone lay there. A red light glowed from it, an indication that he had a voicemail. But he couldn't bring himself to speak to anyone. Not yet. Feeling a little groggy, he decided to brew some coffee. He cringed at the bitter flavor. It tasted somber. He set the mug on the countertop and glanced outside to where the sun was rising. The sun looked somber. Even the air in the room felt somber. His entire being seemed filled with the gloomy mood. He closed his eyes, his body shuddering, and he quickly grabbed into the back of a bar stool as his knees trembled. His dad was gone. He was really gone. At least from here. When he was a child, his parents taught him about eternity, that their life on earth was temporary, and a forever life awaited them, if they only accepted Jesus into their hearts. It made just as much sense to him then as it did now. People put a lot of effort and time and energy into their lives here. It couldn't all be for nothing, not just for a few mere years of existence. His parents had not only spoken of the Bible, they had lived it. With each day, no matter how hard or seemingly trite, they never gave up. They were grateful people. And now, they were both gone. His gaze caught on the phone once more, and slowly he made his way to the living room. The voicemail was from Joel, details about the memorial service. Shawn hadn't been able to bring himself to arrange the service, much less the transportation arrangements, leaving Joel, who had easily agreed, to handle everything. He'd also left messages for his best friend Corey, and for Misty. Shawn ended the voicemail and choked on his tears. He sank into the couch, shut his eyes, and fell into a restless sleep. Sometime later, when the sun hovered over the roof of the house, the ringing of his phone startled him awake. He rubbed his eyes as he slowly reached for his phone, and was surprised to see that the call was coming from Misty.
I got your message. I'm sorry, Shawn. What can I do?
Nothing. Memorial service is on Saturday. He pressed a hand to his head and sighed. Oh, right. The deadline.
No, Shawn. Take that off your plate. You need to focus on your family, on getting through this. Whatever you need, that's the other reason I was calling, to ensure you that the book, as crazy as I have been about pushing it on you, can totally wait.
His hand slipped off his head and he nodded to himself. Yes, okay. Thank you, Misty. Thank you for your understanding.
Anything you need, Shawn, you let me know.
Thank you. He ended the call and got up from the couch. He glanced at the laptop. A romance waiting for him when he was ready. Misty said the audience wanted romance, a happily ever after. His parents had that. That beautiful image of love, the way God intended it. Perfect love that cast out fear. Patient love. Enduring love. Misty said to put the story on hold, and he would. But he wondered how he could possibly write a romance that could compare to the love his parents had shared. He moved into the kitchen and touched a gold frame that held a photo of his parents holding hands and smiling. That was love, right there in that moment, perfectly captured. His heart beat with pain and loss, and the joy of having had his parents for as long as he did. The memorial service took place at his dad's favorite outdoors place, the fishing pond near his home, the same home Shawn had grown up in just a few miles away, his current home. Joel was there along with several cousins Shawn had grown up with but hadn't seen since before college. Corey Sanders, Shawn's best buddy since college, was there too. Though many of the attendees were mere strangers to him than anything, a good portion of them his dad's work colleagues and faithful customers. He found himself comforted by their presence. Altogether, there must have been around 200 people in attendance. It was quite overwhelming emotionally. "Hey, how are you holding up?" Corey wrapped his arm around Shawn. "I'll get through it." He was a good man. Still is. Shawn glanced at his friend and nodded, managing a weak smile. Joel played a couple of his dad's favorite songs on a portable CD player. "How Great Is Our God," and "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." These were songs Shawn had grown up with, tender and loving reminders of God's love for all. Shawn silently cried, overpowered by a sense of peace that his parents were both at rest and in the fullest of joys. Joel stood behind a wooden lectern, his back to the pond, where a couple of baby ducks floated anxiously east, eager to catch up with their mother. His bass voice seemed to contrast with the almost silent atmosphere. "My brother was, as you know, a caring man. He was always putting others first. If someone was upset or down, he did what he could to make sure their spirits were lifted. He couldn't bear seeing despair, and I know that even now he would like for us to be at peace, knowing that he is forever at peace himself with our Lord." When he rejoined the crowd, Shawn made his way to the front. His heart sped up a bit. The closeness of speaking allowed his feelings about the memories of his father becoming a strong reality. "My dad, as Joel said, was others-oriented. He made me feel special to him my whole life, even when I thought I'd let him down." Shawn paused, choking on tears that lodged themselves in his throat. "Just last month, when I was stressing about my love life, he tried to set me up on a blind date." Light laughter erupted from the crowd. He found a way to cheer me up. Johnny Henderson was a loving man to all. He stepped back into the crowd, between Corey and Joel, who placed a tender hand on his shoulder. With the service over, everyone in attendance came by to both Shawn and Joel to offer their condolences. Then Joel took him aside. "Shawn, there's something I need to tell you, in private," Joel said. Corey nodded and made his way over to the pond. His uncle's voice carried that same seriousness with which he told Shawn the news of his father's passing. "Uncle Joel, I don't think I can take any more news right now." "It's something your dad asked me to do." Shawn's forehead crinkled with confusion. "What is it?" "In his trust, your dad named me executor. He left a lot behind. He left almost everything to you." "What do you mean, everything?" "His estate, Shawn. His home, his company, most of the savings." A small breath of air escaped Shawn. As though he had heard him, Joel gently grasped Shawn's hand. "Your dad loved you with all that he had. He left me some of his money too, some of the furnishings, his truck, the one I always envied." Joel laughed a sad but nostalgic laugh. "I know it hurts to even think about it all. You don't need to do anything with it right now. Just let it sink in. Let me help if you need it. For now, let's just take some time to process it." He handed Shawn a card. "That's the attorney your dad used. When you're ready, he will go over any details you need him to." Shawn didn't feel much of anything. He glanced once more at the pond, watching the ducklings making swirls in the water, their mother dovetailing a few inches away. Joel's news meant that Shawn was now a billionaire. That was a giant step away from millionaire status. He couldn't even wrap his mind around that much money, much less what he planned to do with it all. Shawn would gladly have given away every penny of his own earnings and his inheritance for just one more day with his dad. He didn't want the money. He wanted his dad. Chapter 5. "You need to get out, man." Corey opened the window in front of the laptop. A strong gust of wind billowed through the curtains. A few rain clouds soared overhead. 2 weeks had passed since the memorial service. Shawn had managed to meet with the attorney yesterday. As Joel said, the company, stocks, his dad's savings, and the house had been passed down to him. But Shawn was having trouble with the reality of it. It was all so overwhelming, like a tornado of pain and loss and a lot of money. It was surreal and bittersweet at the same time. Corey turned to face his friend. Dude, I love you, but you need to get some air. You've kept yourself inside for 2 weeks straight. It's time to get out. Corey was Shawn's age, with a head of bleach blonde hair and soulful brown eyes that had melted many girls' hearts. Too serious to be committed to any one thing, or person, Corey had surprisingly stuck to academics and earned his degree in business, going on to complete his MBA. He owned a small chain of clothing stores that thrived quite well in downtown Hollywood. Shawn turned to the laptop that was currently powered off, the lid securely shut, a thin layer of dust having accumulated there. So, you still gonna write that love story? Corey smirked, trying to lighten up the mood. Shawn appreciated that about him. One of the likable traits that had drawn Shawn to him was his ability to cheer others up, to lift them up, even when all hope seemed to have faded. He'd been there through all of Shawn's harder moments, the loss of his mom, his struggle with pursuing a novelist's path rather than work for his father. Bridget. Hey, Shawn, at least it's you writing it, and not me. Corey stabbed his thumb into his chest as a wild grin spread across his face. Can you imagine my story? A wanderlust young man finds love, then discards it on the side of the road as he starts yet another new adventure. Shawn laughed. You're not that bad, Corey. If you interviewed the women I've dated, they might not agree. Just then, Corey's phone rang. Hello? Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. A few seconds later, he beamed at Shawn. Your days of loneliness are over. Huh? Shawn fretted over the devious look his buddy was giving him. Remember Lana, that woman I was telling you about? Uh-huh, he said hesitantly. Well, that was her. She wants to see me again. She's volunteering at a charity event. Something for disabled vets. And she's bringing a friend. Have a good time. Shawn escaped into the kitchen and pulled open the refrigerator. Corey strode up beside him. And you're coming with me. He stared listlessly at the mostly empty shelves as the cold temperature of the fridge chilled his arms. Come on, Corey. You know I have nothing to offer anybody. You mean to tell me that you're going to let some self-centered... Don't finish that sentence. He cleared his throat. Sorry, but she's wrong. You're a great guy with a lot to offer. And before you get defensive, I don't mean the money. You've got talent, intelligence, and boyish good looks. Handsome, chiseled features. Wait, debonair hair, captivating blue-gray eyes. Corey lightly tapped his chest and fluttered his eyelashes in a clear mockery of the uttered words. Shawn choked laughed. I think you're trying too hard. Look, I appreciate the thought, but I'm fine where I am. He withdrew a jug of orange juice and poured some into a glass before sitting down at the bar. Corey swung into the bar stool next to him, something in his demeanor turning more serious. Your dad wanted that for you too. You know your parents had something special, something most people never have. My dad, he nodded and sipped his drink. It's not just your personal life. Think about the novel. Think about your audience, man. They're expecting a story about love. True love. A happy ending. All that nonsense. I mean, all that wonderful stuff. Shawn turned to his friend and gave him a funny smile. You really don't believe in love, do you? Corey shrugged his shoulders. Look, it doesn't matter what I think about it. If it's real, it's real. And that's what matters. And that's what you have to give your audience. Something real. Something to believe in. He squeezed Shawn's shoulder and got up. Slipping into his jacket, Corey glanced at his friends once more. Last call. It could change your life. Shawn stared at his glass and then at his buddy. Okay, he sighed. You made your points. Both good points that I can't really contest. Outstanding! The two friends headed to Corey's new yellow convertible, and Corey took off to the outdoor event, just a few miles down the road. By the time they got to the location, they had to circle the park several times before space opened up. Wow, I guess this event was bigger than I realized. I thought Lana was exaggerating when she said everybody would be here, Corey said as they got out of the vehicle. As they made their way to the center of activity, they passed a few Hollywood movie stars. Shawn and Corey left them alone, not wanting to bother them. After all, They weren't here to do autographs, though several women were fawning after the male stars. Shawn was glad he wasn't in the spotlight. He liked his privacy. Living close to Hollywood had its perks, like celebrity sightings, ritzy businesses, and glamorous events. But none of that drew Shawn toward Malibu. It was inconsequential. He enjoyed blending in, not standing out. He wasn't a star, so he never had to worry about fans or paparazzi trying to take his picture or invade his privacy. "There she is!" Corey pointed across the grassy area, near a bench to where a petite woman with short black hair was holding a dog on a leash. To her right, a fair-skinned woman with auburn streaks was chatting animatedly. Corey began his way over to the women when he pivoted back to see that Shawn hadn't budged. "Dude!" he called out. "Let's go!" Shawn gave in. A few minutes later, they were standing before Lana, the black-haired girl, and her friend who was introduced as Tina. She was friendly enough, and Shawn was polite, but there wasn't anything more to it. "So, what's this all about?" Shawn asked as he looked around in awe at the large turnout. Lana said,
"I'm a part of a nonprofit charity. We help disabled vets find pet companions. It's amazing how many people came, isn't it? I mean, this is our first event."
As he observed his surroundings, he noticed how the park was practically overrun with dogs, a few Dobermans, some German Shepherds, mixed terriers, and many other breeds.
"What brings you here?"
Tina asked him. "Corey dragged me here," Shawn said. Everyone laughed, but it wasn't far from the truth. He leaned down to pet Lana's dog. "Is she from your organization?"
"As a matter of fact, she is. My mom is a disabled vet. She doesn't know it yet, but I'm bringing this little girl home to her today."
Lana grinned. After a few minutes of petting Lana's dog and discussing the turnout of the event, Shawn excused himself and pushed through a sea of attendees, crossing over to the back entrance of the park, where a small handful of people milled about. A refreshment table stood near the entrance to the park. He helped himself to a can of soda and a plate of cheese and crackers. It was better over here, away from the hustle and bustle of stars and aspiring dog owners. A sense of peace. As he sipped on the soda, he noticed a woman, perhaps in her late 20s, standing a few feet away. She was talking to a couple, but it was the way she spoke that caught his eye. Her voice was calm, gentle, and she made many strokes with her hands as she spoke. Her eyes were wide and lovely, and focused on the couple, expressing a clear regard for the conversation. As the man responded, she listened attentively, cocking her head and leaning slightly forward, a small, interested smile on her lips. Shawn couldn't remember ever dating a woman who showed such genuine interest, though certainly there were numerous women who possessed such attributes. The woman, still smiling, slightly rotated her head, and her eyes caught on his as her long blonde hair swirled around her. Her smile turned bigger, her mouth slightly opened as her eyes twinkled at him. Embarrassed for staring, he felt his hands fumbling for the can of soda as he attempted to balance it next to his plate of food. But instead of clutching the can, he ended up pitching it forward, directly into the path of the woman. The brown liquid splashed across the front of her shirt. She gasped. He gasped. "Sorry," he stuttered. Embarrassed, he quickly looked away and hurried all the way across the park, back to Corey, who was now alone and staring at him curiously as he drank from a cup. "Stumble much?" Corey smirked as Shawn tripped over a small rock. "What's so funny?" Corey glanced behind him and smirked again. "Looks like someone has you a bit befuddled." Shawn stared hard at his friend. "Befuddled? You've never used that word in your life." Corey stared back at him, his smirk ever increasing. "That's because I've never had the opportunity. Until now. Guess Tina's out of the question, huh?" "Huh?" Corey just chuckled and shook his head. It was a few minutes past 4, a beautiful spring day with early summer clouds. The sun poured a golden funnel of light across Shawn's work desk. A perfect moment to write a perfect romance. Except he couldn't. His mind kept traveling back to the woman at the charity event. Before Bridget, he dated a few women, but never had he been caught up by their mere presence the way he'd been yesterday. though he hadn't given up on love like Corey had. He also didn't believe in love at first sight. He knew the brief glance they exchanged wasn't that. But he'd found himself magnetized by her, and it wasn't her looks as much as the gentleness of her mannerisms. As she shifted her gaze toward him, her long blonde hair swirled around her in slow motion, like one of those scenes out of a love story. But it was that smile that found its way to him. None of the women he dated had given him a look like that, a look that suggested consideration. Consideration for him. A slight move in her eyes that suggested interest in him. Sure, there'd been women who'd expressed interest in him, even some who remembered his birthday and brought him gifts. But mostly, the relationships ended up being about them, not him. He humphed, rising from the desk and wandering toward the front door. Salespeople looked at him like that all the time, with interest, because they wanted to sell him something. This was no different. She wasn't there to find someone. She was there because she was a potential buyer, or just a friend of a potential buyer. He shuffled to the kitchen and started wiping down the bar with a damp rag. His eye caught on a piece of paper. He picked up the folded flyer that rested next to an empty saucer. It was from today's Disabled Vets Affair. There, just next to a description of the charity, was a photograph of a young blonde woman by the name of Shelly Rogers. She wasn't a potential buyer after all, or there to meet anybody. She'd coordinated everything, started the charity herself in honor of her late disabled father. He set the flyer down and nodded. It all made sense. She seemed friendly and interested because that was her job. He cleared his throat, feeling a little silly about his assumptions. He went to his station and plopped into the seat. It was time to get the romance on. Well, in written form.
Chapter 6. Shelly Rogers felt beat. The event had taken off more successfully than she'd expected. Her self-made company, Sidekicks for Soldiers, had been long in the making, so she had been overwhelmed and grateful over the unexpected turnout at its premiere. People from all over the state had come to be a part of the opening event. Only a handful were family, friends, and associates. Many of the attendees were disabled vets accompanied by close relatives as well as a plethora of media representatives. Not wanting to make anyone feel exploited, Shelly agreed to a private interview with the news, citing briefly how she'd come to form the organization. She'd been surprised, too, when scores of Hollywood showed, some well-known actors, a few directors, even a couple of studio heads who approached her about making a documentary. But she wasn't ready for such a big step. She'd just gotten the charity off the ground, and that had taken a lot out of her. Now, as she let her gaze drift over the stretch of the park, watching the cleanup crew discard the last of the trash, she let out a long breath, realizing how tired she was. Lana had already taken off, which meant she would be on her own for the night. That was fine with her. She was much too drained to do anything but sleep anyway. Grabbing her purse, she walked to her truck, an older red Dodge 1500, and started the engine. As she grabbed the wheel, her heart pattered a bit, the excitement of the day still with her. Thankfully, she lived only a few miles away. She began to drive home. Lana proved tremendously helpful in the setup of the event. She knew she couldn't have made it through without her. Lana had been the one to use her connections to get some of the more influential people involved in today's turnout. Shelly had met a lot of people and formed many new contacts. One couple offered to bring in their newest litter of puppies to add to the roster of waiting disabled vets. She made a right onto her street and found herself smiling. The day had gone so well, it almost seemed like a dream. Well, in fact, it was a dream. Her dream come true. She'd thought about organizing a charity for disabled vets, specifically because her own father had been a disabled vet. He suffered a stroke the year before, which propelled her to kickstart a campaign for the charity. As she pulled into her driveway, she felt the smile still glued on her face and started to realize there was another reason why it was there. That man who had been standing nearby when she'd been engaged with the couple. It had been hard not to notice him there, his hand frozen in midair, his embarrassment when he accidentally spilled his soda on her shirt, the way he flew across the park. She didn't know if she'd been more amused or curious when he jetted off, but she remembered noticing the short chestnut waves that curled just atop his head. The hairstyle wasn't usual for a man, close-cut, just beneath the waviness. It was sweet, innocent-like to her. And then she'd seen only the back of him moving briskly to his destination. Why she had bothered becoming aware of him at all, she didn't know. And that caused her to be even more curious. Unlocking the front door of her home, she breathed a sigh of relaxation. It had been quite a day. She looked forward to processing it all. Her usual way of winding down was to turn on a movie, have a glass of wine, and stretch out on the couch. She found a good movie on, an old Western. She poured herself a drink and plopped into the soft ruby upholstered settee, cradled by 2 emerald velvet pillows. She called it her Christmas couch. A tiny tug of sadness pulled at her heart as she thought over the highlights of the day. Before her dad passed, she'd already been planning out the charity, hoping to honor those who served and had been wounded, like her father. He had been right by her side from the inception of the idea. But when the stroke unexpectedly happened, the venture turned bittersweet. Like today, her hope for the event announcing the premiere of Sidekicks for Soldiers went from one with her father by her side to one honoring his memory. She knew he'd been proud of her, that he would want her to continue on. In those months since he'd been gone, she'd spent most of her time grieving. Though her parents divorced when she was just a child, her mother stayed by her side through that entire time, mourning with her. Her parents' relationship ended long ago, but they never stopped caring for one another as friends. Shelly was thankful to be close to her mother. Grieving together proved cathartic. Lana and Brandon rallied around her after a few weeks. When the figurative sun began to shine again, Brandon was a jokester, and she'd quickly found herself laughing more than crying. Lana helped distract her with plans for the opening. The TV was zoomed in on Clint Eastwood, exhibiting his famous squinty glare. Shelly cherished her friends and family, yet her heart still yearned for love, even though Rick left. Even though he broke her heart. Sighing, she set down her glass on the end table and tried to focus on the movie. It was one of her favorites, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But thoughts nagged at her. Like, why was she thinking about that man from the event? And remembering Rick? Why now? Her ex-husband moved states away nearly 2 years ago. She'd been crushed by his abandonment, by his betrayal. Frustrated, she shook her head. Ever since Rick had betrayed her, she hadn't dared think about falling in love again. That the idea popped into her head now annoyed her. Ugh, she said aloud and tossed one of the couch pillows to the floor. She refused to think about love or the guy at the park anymore. Jumping up from the couch, she huffed all the way to the kitchen. She searched for something to snack on in the pantry. A bag of potato chips, graham crackers, anything. The shelves were practically bare. In the refrigerator, her chances were equally slim. The shelves offering nothing more than a half-gallon of milk, a handful of condiments, a few cans of soda, and week-old pizza. She threw out the expired pizza. Then, closing the door, she leaned her back against it, a small smile escaping her lips. Let's face it, Shelly, you're not just starved for food. She laughed at herself, shook her head, and returned to the living room. Smiling at Eastwood, she slumped into the couch, tucking her left leg under her right, and took out her phone. Time to order pizza, she told herself. After she placed her order for a large pepperoni extra cheese, she glanced at Blondie's wink. You wouldn't hurt me, would you? She laughed again, sighing as she stretched out her long legs across the couch. Lana frequently exclaimed her concern about Shelly's solo conversations. Don't you see the irony, Shell? You're in charge of this companion pets for vets thing, and you're the one who needs a companion. You're right, Lana, she sighed. Except that I can't imagine it. On the TV, Blondie was scowling at her. Dramatically hanging her head in shame, she said, Okay, I get it. I'm a wuss. Chapter 7.
Okay, Shawn, you got this. He cracked his knuckles and laid his fingers atop the keyboard. Here I go. Jane chased after her friend and grabbed her by the elbow.
What are you doing? Carrie spun, frowning at her as she stuck her hands on her hips. Look, I know you're tired of me trying to set you up, but something about this guy. This guy you don't know? Right. She blinked. Anyway, I sense something different about him. If I'm wrong, fine, but all I'm asking you to do is go over there and look at him for yourself. You don't have to say anything. Oh, okay, so make myself look like a freak. I'm sure he won't notice me staring at him. Sounds like a great plan, Jane. She smirked. Jane grumbled. Just do it for yourself, even if it's to prove me wrong. Carrie smiled and shook her head at her friend. Then, to Jane's surprise, she went back inside the airport and wandered over to the Mexican restaurant.
Shawn sat back and stretched his arms behind him into a makeshift pillow. Not bad, he supposed. Maybe the guy wouldn't turn out to be a creep after all. Someone knocked on the front door. Shawn huffed. He was finally getting somewhere with the novel. He slowly rose from the chair and peeked at the camera to see that it was Corey. Swinging open the door, he said, "Not a good time." Corey slapped him on the shoulder. "It's always a good time to see me, unless..." He paused dramatically as he surveyed the house. "You have a special guest?" Shawn snorted. "You wish." "Aw, but you do." He pointed at the laptop. "Your love story isn't just a story." Shawn raised his eyebrows. Corey threw his arm around his buddy and grinned broadly. "It's going to come true, my friend. It won't just be in your head or on a page anymore." Shawn shrugged his arm off, but he felt himself smile a little at the thought that he might find love. Real love. For years, he thought he'd had it. It had seemed so real. But the idea that a woman could truly love him for real, forever, made him feel like he was floating on a cloud. He felt like a giddy teenager, and immediately shook himself out of the daydream. "So, how's it coming along?" He gestured at the screen. Shawn sighed. "Slow, very slow, like my own love life." "Oh, poor dude. You sound so down." He snapped his fingers. "I know what you need. A night out." Shawn groaned. "Again? Don't you ever give up?" Corey glanced at the ceiling as if pondering that. No. Look, I appreciate the gesture, but I really can't. I've got a story to write." "And your own story to write, too." He placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but you do need to get out more. Besides, how can you write a love story if you haven't lived it personally?" Shawn rolled his eyes toward Corey and took a deep breath. "You're right. I know I've given you a hard time for a while now, but you're absolutely right." Corey smacked him on the arm. "Good, because the girls are waiting outside." Shawn cough-choked. "What?" He went over to the front window and peered out. Sure enough, Corey's yellow convertible was parked at the curb, and 2 figures waited inside. He looked back at his friend. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "No, and neither should you." In the car, Shawn exchanged greetings with Lana and Tina, who were sitting in the back seat. "So, where are we going?" he asked Corey. "We thought it's such a beautiful day. Let's grab a bite at our favorite taco place in Long Beach," Corey said. That did sound appetizing. Shawn nodded and rested his head against the seat. The drive would take about 45 minutes, plenty of time for him to relax. A cool breeze washed over his face and he closed his eyes, breathing in the fresh air, feeling it go into his lungs. He realized he hadn't been this stress-free in a really long time. "Hey, turn it up!" Tina shouted. Corey pumped up the volume on the stereo, a David Bowie song. Shawn felt his seat jerk a little. He opened his eyes to see the women bouncing around and singing along. Corey joined them and nudged his riding partner, but Shawn just smiled and admired the scenery of the trees and the bright horizon before them. Before long, Corey pulled into the small parking lot of the Mexican restaurant. The place was close enough to the beach that the sound of seagulls carried through the air. The four of them hopped out and strolled to the walk-up window. Corey placed orders for himself and Lana, then stepped aside for Shawn. He ordered his favorite carne asada burrito, with extra lettuce and tomatoes. This was the only way he got his vegetables in. Tina stood behind him, talking to Lana. He wouldn't feel right if he didn't pay for her. "What would you like?" he asked her. She turned toward him.
"Oh no, I got it."
"No, it's okay. I don't mind." She smiled warily and gave him her order. Within 5 minutes, the four of them were seated at a park bench-style table, stuffing their faces with the best Mexican food available in Southern California. Shawn felt his body relax a bit more, though his mind wandered to the unintentional romance. Carrie expressed such reluctance toward meeting someone again. Would Jane be able to convince her friend to date again, or trust enough to fall in love? The answer was yes, because it was a romance. It needed to go in that direction. The question was, how? "How are your vegetables, dude?" "Huh?" Shawn looked down at his plate. "Oh, yeah, good." Corey and Lana laughed. Shawn didn't know why. Tina was busy putting a chip in her mouth and smiling at the new couple. Was Shawn being a bad date? He hadn't asked for a double date, so he shouldn't feel bad. Corey knew he wasn't ready to date, but he did feel a little guilty that he didn't have feelings for Tina. He didn't really know her, of course, but he knew there was no sort of chemistry between them. Did Tina agree? He glanced to see her nodding at something Lana was saying. She seemed at ease, like she was enjoying herself. No, he supposed the attraction wasn't there for her either. Corey hoped for some kind of thing to transpire between them. That much was obvious, and he appreciated his friend's intent, but there was nothing between them, and that was okay with him. As he sat there listening to the conversation between the couple, he nearly gagged on a chip when he spotted the woman from the charity event. "You okay?" Tina asked him, looking a little concerned. He turned to her. "Oh yeah, sure am." Corey gave him a funny look, then glanced in the direction where Shawn had been staring. Nodding with understanding, he grinned, but said nothing. While Corey and the girls chatted, Shawn found his gaze land on the woman once more. She was third in line at the window, and she seemed preoccupied with her thoughts. Her hands a bit fidgety as she looked out at the beach. And then she looked at him. His heart jumped. He quickly broke eye contact and swallowed at least 3 heartbeats. Don't look up. Just keep your cool, Shawn."
"And then he did a funny spinning dance thing, remember?"
Tina was saying.
"Oh yeah."
Lana laughed. Corey must have felt left out because he joined in. "Not as funny as me, though, right?" he said, looking directly at his new girlfriend. Lana paused, tucking her short black hair behind her ear, then kissed him on the nose. He actually blushed. Shawn couldn't believe it. He'd never seen his friend like this before.
"We're heading to the bathroom,"
Tina announced as she and Lana took off. With a little trepidation, Shawn allowed himself to turn his head toward the line again. The breeze picked up, and so did his pulse. The soft wind picked up her hair, and it turned into fire underneath the starving sun. She was watching him. Shawn gasped. He actually gasped, loudly, sounding not unlike a chipmunk squeaking.
Chapter 8. Shelly's favorite Mexican stand was busier than usual, but she pulled into the parking lot anyway. Nothing compared to their carne asada burritos. Besides, her stomach had grumbled for the past 2 hours, until finally she couldn't ignore it any longer. It was one of those beach days, the kind that brought people out of their homes. Though they were only at the beginning of spring, the lovely breeze and waves pulled in the summer feel of relaxation and sunbathing. The sandy area of Long Beach was swamped with beach towels, umbrellas, and coolers, as families, singles, and couples populated the shore. She was blessed to live close to the beach, less than 10 miles from her home in Carson. Though she wasn't made of money, like so many of the nearby residents, she still could relish in some of their close-to-home luxuries. Her stomach bubbled. If she didn't get some food in there soon, she was going to explode. She fiddled with her hands, trying best not to think about that image.
"Next,"
She stepped to the counter and ordered her favorite burrito with a large Pepsi. As the cashier rang her up, she turned toward the tables and felt a bit of the cool breeze hop into her mouth. There, sitting across from some guy, was the man she'd seen at the premiere. She smiled as she watched him. He blinked, popped a chip in his mouth, and grinned at something his friend said. And then he faced her. The staring contest lasted about 5 full seconds before his mouth slightly dropped open. Amused at his obvious embarrassment and wondering what it could mean, she paid for her order and grabbed her icy soda. As she searched for a place to sit, he glanced her way once more, though he quickly turned his attention back to his friend. Because her table was only a few feet from his, she heard the unmistakable sound of a squealing sound as it came out of his open jaw. Shelly wasn't quite sure how it could be, but this guy actually looked even cuter when he made the strange noise. Opening a packet of salsa, she pursed her lips inward, forcing herself not to laugh. A heavy breeze stirred through the picnic area of the restaurant and lifted loose napkins and trash, sending them in a whirlwind that passed over her head and then shot out past their table. Thankfully, she'd brought a light jacket. Shelly pulled it across her chest and huddled closer to the table. Making herself look to the beach, Shelly concentrated on the flavor of her food, savoring the spicy meat and the sweetness of the soda. A moment later, she sensed movement behind her. She rotated her head slightly and saw him standing at the passenger side of a yellow convertible, holding open the door. She could just make out the back of a woman crawling into the rear seat. She wondered if that was his date. That thought depressed her a little. A guy with bleach blonde hair slid into the driver's seat. He revved the engine, and in a few seconds, they took off. Or maybe she was with the driver. That made her feel a little better. Shelly finished the rest of her food, discarded the trash. She paused at her truck and watched the incoming waves. It was then that she realized her heart had been knocking a bit faster than normal, because the peaceful nature of the ocean calmed the racing of her heart. Her phone rang from the inside of her purse. She dug for it and read the screen. Lana. She hit the talk button. "Hey, Shell, how's it going?" "Just getting ready to head home." "Care for a visit in a bit?" Shelly cradled the phone between her neck and shoulder as she burrowed through her purse for the truck keys. "Sure, come on over." "'Kay, see you soon." Shelly ended the call. Wonder what that was all about. Shrugging, she got behind the wheel and headed home. True to her word, Lana showed up soon, less than an hour later. Lana's face blazed like it was on fire. Her lips turned into a giant smile, her eyes full of excitement. "Lana, what's gotten into you?" Shelly asked with a laugh. "Shell, I kid you not. I am in love." "Wait, what? How? I mean, didn't you just meet him?" "Well, yeah." "I haven't even met him yet, Lana." Lana's eyes seemed to wink simultaneously. "You're about to. I just invited him. He just had to take care of a few things at home first, but he's on his way." "Wow, Lana. I haven't seen you happy like this ever." "I know, right? It's so fetch." "Okay, Miss Mean Girls." She went into the kitchen. "Drink?" "I'm good." The doorbell rang. Shelly went to open the door. The bleach blonde guy from the restaurant. "Hey, I know you." He and Lana exchanged mystified looks. Shelly pressed her face against the front window. A yellow car was parked out front. "Yep, it's you." Laughing nervously, the blonde surfer-looking dude said,
What's going on?"
He looked to Lana for help. She shrugged and shook her head, making a winding circle with her finger against her head and lipping, "Cuckoo." "I'm not crazy, Lana. He was at the restaurant about an hour ago. There was a guy with him and some girl." "Yeah, me and Tina. You were there?" Lana said. "Yeah, how did I not see you?" "We must have been in the bathroom."
"I'm Corey."
He stuck his hand out. She took it. Lana rushed forward. "So sorry. This is my boyfriend, Corey. Corey, This is my best friend, Shelly." He smiled and winked at her. "Nice to meet you, Corey. Care for a drink?"
"I'm good, thanks."
Then a realization crossed Corey's face. He snapped his fingers.
"Aha! Yes! I know who you are."
Now the one feeling confused, Shelly slid into a bar stool and stared at Corey in anticipation of an explanation.
"The charity premiere. Shawn was all flustered when he came back."
"Sorry, I am totally perplexed here." Shelly scrunched up her face. "Who's Shawn?"
"The guy who caught your eye, and not just then, but today too."
He snapped his fingers again, looking pleased.
"And to answer your question as to why you didn't notice Lana at the restaurant earlier, why, that's simple."
"It is?" Lana asked, looking equally puzzled. He nodded, his grin practically combusting.
"Because you couldn't take your eyes off Shawn."
So that was his name. The guy with the magnetizing look. Now Lana stared at her, a spark of glee crossing her face. "Looks like you've got some news of your own, Shell." "Huh? Goodbye, Rick. Hello, Shawn." Shelly's heart tripped over itself at the sound of his name. What was happening to her? She felt silly, like a high school girl with her very first crush. But she was 30, not a teenager. So then, why did she feel so giddy?
"Hey, how about a double date?"
Corey suggested. Shelly stared at him. "But there was another girl with you guys."
"Oh, that's Tina. Yeah, I tried to get them together, but he doesn't seem interested."
Oh, Shelly didn't know Shawn, but that news pacified her as she found herself letting out a little breath.
"Hey, why don't I give him a call and see about going to dinner or something?"
"No, Corey, he doesn't know me. I'm sure he's not interested."
"What do you mean? Why do you think he showed no interest in Tina? He really can't keep his eyes off you."
Really? For whatever reason, those words relieved her. But Shawn was a stranger. Why should the way he feels matter to her? They didn't even know each other. They hadn't even spoken.
"That's why we need to set up a time so that you can get together."
Shelly spun toward Corey. "I just spoke out loud, didn't I?" Lana grinned and winked knowingly at her friend. "It's one of your best traits." Sighing, Shelly spun back toward the bar. "Well, I guess so. I mean, why not?" Corey slapped his hands together.
"Great."
He pulled out his phone and dialed. To Lana, Shelly whispered, "He doesn't waste any time, does he?" "Nope." Corey was practically shouting into the phone.
"Hey, Shawn, you busy? Okay, good. I have something to tell you, dude. Actually, yeah, I think it will help your story."
Lana and Shelly frowned at each other.
"Yeah, I got that girl you saw at the event. You know, the one you got all funny around. Yeah, that was her at Mario's today. Because she's right here. You won't believe this, but she's Lana's best friend. Yeah, I know. Small world, huh? So, what do you say to dinner later this week?"
Shelly's stomach started to curl. "I gotta go to the bathroom," she told Lana. "You okay?" Lana asked her, looking concerned. "Yeah, just a little queasy." She hurried down the hall and shut the door and sat on the lid of the toilet. Drawing in deep breaths, she spoke aloud her mantra. "You're fine. God loves you." The huge intake of hair slowly released. God, why am I freaking out? He's just some guy I don't even know. Why am I reacting this way? "Because you like him?" Lana's voice carried through the closed door. "Seriously?" she said to her friend, laughing. "You better be careful with talking out loud. It could get you into trouble." "Are they still on the phone?" "No, he just hung up." Shelly took in another long breath and slowly released it. "So, what's the verdict?" "The drive-in tomorrow night." Why does this sound like a scene out of Grease? Lana chuckled. Shaking her head, she rose from the seat, opened the door, and collapsed into Lana's arms. Okay, let's not get overly dramatic." Lana pulled her off of her and looked into her eyes. "You got this. It's just a date." "But what if it turns into something more? Would that be so bad?" Shelly groaned. "Maybe." "He's not Rick." She looked up at her. How do you know? I've been hanging out with him, remember? He's Corey's best friend. Shawn is sweet. Really quiet, but sweet. And I saw the way he looked at you today. He likes you, Shelly. But what if... Lana touched her hand. It's going to be okay. God knows your desires. Just take your worries to him, and he will protect you. She squeezed Lana's hand. You're a good friend. Thank you. Chapter 9.
After Corey dropped him off, Shawn wondered what to do with himself. Normally, he would turn on the TV, have a snack, relax, then go to his workstation and jump back into his story. But right now, he didn't feel the pull to do any of those things. Before he could contemplate the change, his phone rang, alerting him to Joel's call. Hey, Uncle Joel. Shawn, how are you doing? Could be doing a lot better. As best I can, I guess. Well, I don't mean to be intrusive, but have you given any thought to your dad's estate? His servants have been paid for the year, and they are still tending to the grounds. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. My head's such a mess, I haven't even thought about taking care of things. He couldn't believe he'd forgotten all about it. Don't be hard on yourself. I wouldn't expect you to. The place is pretty much running itself right now. I left instructions with them, per your dad's will, that you're now in charge if they need anything. In the meantime, they're tending to their duties the way they always have. But of course, you can make any changes you deem necessary. Shawn's dad had been an efficient man, a highly respected man. The servants, clients, friends, even acquaintances looked up to him. He knew his dad's servants pretty well. He trusted them as much as he trusted his dad. No, leave everything as it is. Should I go over there? I mean, reassure them or remind them that I'm here if they need anything? Take your time. Whenever you're ready, okay? They know you're grieving. They are too. And I've told them that you need more time to process all this, and they totally get that. So if you need it, take it. Is there anything I can do for you? No, I'm okay. Corey's been a big help getting my mind off of things. Joel's laugh was hearty. I bet. Hey, how's your book? Shawn glanced at the monitor that seemed to stare at him with its dark, cynical face. Okay, still got a ways to go. Well, let me know if you need something. I know I'm far away, but I'm still here for you. I know, Uncle Joel. Thank you. He said this with some emotion. He was very grateful to him for keeping things in line while he adjusted to this new situation. I love you, kid. Love you too. The call ended. The house grew quieter. He found himself thinking about tomorrow night. Corey said they would be going to the drive-in. Part of him looked forward to it. It was one of the places his parents used to take him to when he was growing up. It carried sentimental feelings. On the other hand, he was thoroughly nervous. He didn't know Shelly. Shelly. What a beautiful name. He cleared his throat and shook his head. She's just a woman you don't know. That's what he told Corey over the phone. He responded that there was no better way to get to know her than by hanging out with her. It was a point he couldn't argue. He'd avoided dating women for long enough, he supposed. It was just a date. That was all. That's what he kept telling himself as he turned on the TV, kicked up his feet on the coffee table, and opened up a can of lemonade iced tea. It's just a date. So then, why were his hands quivering as he took a drink?
Chapter 10. When Shelly pulled her truck into a spot at the drive-in, Lana hopped out and raced over to the yellow convertible a few slots away. Not for the first time, Shelly wondered about this apparent love at first sight that seemed to have a grip on her friend. She certainly seemed happy, but wasn't she moving too fast? Then she kicked herself, literally. Wasn't she experiencing the same thing herself? Lana! She called after her. She whirled back around, her dark eyebrows raised in a questioning mode. Ready? She asked as Shelly caught up to her. Shelly frowned. Ready for what? Lana just laughed and grabbed Shelly's hand, dragging her to the convertible. Corey jumped out from behind the wheel. There seemed to be a lot of hopping going on, Shelly mused. Corey squeezed his girlfriend into a brief hug. Hey, Shelly, how you doing? He asked, turning to face her. Oh, I'm good. She scanned their surroundings. Where was Shawn? Shawn's in the John. Hey, that rhymed. He'll be right back. Embarrassed, she looked at Corey. Did I speak out loud again?
He grinned. No, but I figured you were looking for him.
So no matter if she spoke out loud or not, her intentions were obvious. Great.
Let's go to the concession stand before it becomes too packed.
Corey gestured to the small building a few feet away. Sounds good. Shelly nodded. The three of them headed to the middle of the large parking area and inside the air-conditioned building. Only 3 people stood in line. The menu board featured combination plates, hamburgers, hot dogs, or tacos. The usual fare was available as well: popcorn, pretzels, candy, and slushies. Corey placed both his and Lana's orders. Having had her share of Mexican food, she decided on a hamburger meal and a box of red vines. Then Shawn appeared around the corner, and Shelly's heart dropped into her stomach.
Hey, buddy. Nice of you to join us. I was about to start a search party.
Shawn emitted a slight smile.
Hungry? Yeah, but I'll get in line.
Corey nudged him with his elbow.
Don't be ridiculous. What do you want?
Shawn gave him his order and stepped backward, colliding with the end of the counter. Wincing, he reached behind him to rub his lower back. And then, he rotated his head a little, and his eyes landed right on Shelly's. Thankfully, she was standing near a bench because she felt her legs wobbling a little. Quickly, she grabbed hold of the table, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from his. Why couldn't she stop staring at him? Wait a minute. Why was she only blaming herself? He was staring at her, too.
Okay, the contest is over,
Corey joked. Huh? She broke her gaze away from Shawn's and looked quizzically at Corey.
You both won. Now, let's see how much you can talk to each other. Let's try.
He gestured to Shelly as he turned to Shawn.
Shawn, this is Shelly. Shelly, this is Shawn.
The 2 of them stood there, their feet glued to the floor, their arms stiffly at their sides.
You look like mirrors of each other,
Corey quipped. How embarrassing. But he was right. Shawn was the first to break the awkwardness. He took a couple of steps forward and held out his hand.
Hi, Shelly.
When her hand connected to his, it felt like a light current of electricity passed through her fingers. Did he feel it too? She peered up at him. He seemed so tall, at least 6 feet, towering over her 5'6" frame. Based on the sudden twitching his body made, she assumed he'd felt the electric charge too. Their hands seemed stuck together, even though his hand was a bit larger than hers. It felt like the perfect size as it cradled around hers, and his skin was smooth, not sweaty, unlike most men's she's encountered. But it was his eyes that pulled her in more than anything. A gentleness shined in them, a shy kindness. She couldn't look away.
Guys?
She could hear Corey's voice, but he sounded so far away.
Food's ready. Uh-huh.
Shawn answered him, but his stare remained fixed on her. Then Corey waved his hand between their faces. Simultaneously, their heads swiveled toward him.
If this keeps up, you're both gonna miss the movie and this delicious food. The previews have already started.
Almost mindlessly, Shelly found herself following them. What had just happened? She couldn't remember ever feeling tongue-tied around a guy before. Shawn was walking just in front of her. He had felt that electricity too, right? Isn't that why he held onto her hand? Fixed his eyes so deeply into hers. It was like neither of them could break away. Her heart was beating like mad. Stop it! She chastised herself and pressed a hand over her chest, as though that would slow the acceleration. How about we sit in the back of your truck, Shell? Lana said. Shelly nodded and led the way. Dropping the tailgate, she pulled out a couple of large, thick blankets from a tote at the back and spread them across the bed. Everyone pulled themselves into the bed, and Corey divvied out the food. Of course, Corey and Lana sat pressed together, all the way in the back next to the window of the cab. But that meant that Shawn wound up next to Shelly toward the front of the bed. They were positioned so closely that she could feel his knee brushing against hers. It sent a tiny chill up her leg. Cool down, Shelly. She bit into her burger and forced herself to focus on the screen as the feature film started to play. She just realized she didn't even know what the movies they were watching. The drive-in played a twin bill for each screen. She didn't want to invite any more jokes, so she decided not to ask which movies they came to see. Besides, she was about to find out. A low-key piano began to play as the credits rolled. The camera zoomed in on a couple at a restaurant, both gazing into each other's eyes. Ugh. She hated romantic movies.
Me too,
Shawn said beside her. Shelly faced him. What?
I don't like these types of movies either.
Shelly, keep your thoughts to yourself. Oh, I guess we have that in common.
Yeah, I guess we do.
He smiled at her, and his eyes burned brighter. They were so beautiful. Her heart skipped, and she almost choked on her burger.
Hey, the movie's on, you know, Corey said. A love story. Just perfect, don't you think?
He winked at them both. She found herself admiring Corey's candid sense of humor. It reminded her of her brothers. She made a mental note to call Brandon later. She flicked her gaze to the screen where the man was getting on one knee in front of the whole restaurant. Already? Shelly exclaimed. Lana said, They've been dating for over a year. Didn't you hear them discussing it? Oh. No, she hadn't heard anything. But now, as she paid attention to the film, watching the woman nodding and crying and hugging him as he slid the ring across her finger, she realized that she still longed for marriage. That fact shocked her. After what Rick had done, she was surprised to feel anything like this again. Beside her, Shawn sipped on a blueberry slushie, his eyes pinned to the movie. She wondered what he was thinking, if he had ever been in love. Of course he'd been in love. Look at him. He was beautiful, irresistible, so nice and humble and polite. So then why was he here with her? Turning back to the movie, she frowned. She wondered if he'd been married before, like she had. And what would he think of her past? That she was a divorced woman. Would that be a problem for him? She finished the last bite of her burger and tried concentrating on the movie. But all she could think about was that love wasn't simple and smooth. Not like they tried to show in the movies. It was much more complicated and heartbreaking. Depressed now, she put her fries aside and waited anxiously for the romance to be over. She hoped the next movie was a comedy or an action. Anything to get her mind off the hopelessness and negativity she felt. Chapter 11.
Shawn didn't care for romance flicks. He knew Corey set this all up with the intent of pushing him and Shelly together. That was fine. He didn't care. Actually, he surprised himself by wanting the blind date. Ever since he'd seen her at the charity event, her face had taken over his thoughts. He couldn't get her out of his head. She was beautiful. Her long blonde flowing hair, just like you'd expect in a romance novel, which was a good idea for his own. Her eyes that seemed to search him. He almost smiled at the way she tried her best to stay stationary so that their bodies weren't touching. He could see the nervousness in her face, and he recognized it because he felt it too. The first movie didn't seem to be pleasing her. She kept squirming and frowning. And he wondered what that had all meant. Had she been heartbroken? Or was she like Corey, uncomfortable with the idea of true love? Or maybe there was something about himself she didn't care for. Did he have bad breath? Did he smell? Discreetly, he turned to the side and blew air into his cupped hands, then inhaled. All he could smell was popcorn. He sniffed his arm. A faint aroma from his cologne lingered. He seemed to check out in at least those departments. Now with the second movie started, a comedy, she grew noticeably relaxed. Their legs inevitably made contact, but she didn't pull away. His hands turned warm and a bit shaky. The last time he'd been this close to a woman was with Bridget. She'd humiliated him. He trusted her for years, believing that she loved him as much as he loved her. That she wanted to marry him. No, he couldn't go through that again. But it wouldn't be fair to compare Shelly to her. He did his best to focus on the comedy. He laughed a little, and the heat in his hands dissipated. He blew out a small breath.
You okay?
Shelly seemed concerned. Oh, he cleared his throat. Yeah, I'm good. He managed a smile. She turned back to the movie, and he breathed out once more, though a bit more quietly this time. A few minutes later, the movie ended. Corey and Lana had fallen asleep. Guess they lost interest. Shawn quipped. Shelly laughed.
Yeah, guess so.
Shawn stared at her. What did you think of the movies?
They were okay. I really liked the comedy.
Yeah, me too. It was hilarious. Are comedies your favorites?
Actually, no. I love Westerns the most, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah? She blushed. Shawn was tickled by her reaction. You got a crush on someone?
Blondie.
Now Shawn was truly baffled. He had only been teasing her about a possible actor she liked. But now it seemed there was someone else.
Yeah, you know, Clint Eastwood.
Shawn exhaled, feeling like he was letting out all the air in one of those large helium balloons. Oh, good to know. Shelly smiled at him. They had another staring contest. This time, it lasted a good minute before either of them broke away. He touched the top of her hand, running his fingers across it. His heart thumped maddeningly, trying to escape its small chamber, but with nowhere to go. Groggy, Corey mumbled. Where am I? I'll drive, Shawn offered, letting go of Shelly. Yeah, thanks. Corey blinked, rubbing at his eyes. He gave Lana's cheek a quick kiss before getting out of the truck. Shelly, it was really nice to meet you, Shawn said as he helped her down.
Yes, it was.
She stood beside the vehicle, her shoulder leaning on it at an awkward angle. Her eyes lit up, more beautiful than ever before. He was going to have to stop looking at her like she was in a romance novel. He felt foolish, like he'd never met a woman before. What was wrong with him? She shook his hand, a slow, gentle tug, and smiled at him before getting into her truck. Shawn and Corey made their way to the car. Corey wobbled to the passenger side as Shawn started the engine. Shawn's car, an older Toyota, waited in Corey's driveway. On the drive there, Shawn kept thinking about the evening, how relaxed he'd felt in Shelly's presence. They arrived in Malibu about an hour later. See you later, dude, Corey said as he walked a little less wobbly into his house. Good night. By the time Shawn arrived home, it was nearing midnight. Exhausted, he fell into the couch. Not for the first time, he couldn't help but notice the quiet. The more he looked around the massive house, the more lonely he felt. Going on a double date had been fun, but it stirred something inside of him that he hadn't felt in months. He wasn't sure he was ready to feel that again. The morning was crisp, and the cool air vented into the living room. Shawn had left one of the windows open, and he shivered as he went to shut it. He checked his phone to see that there was a message from Misty.
Hey, just checking on you. Hope you're doing okay. Don't worry about making the deadline. I've pushed it back a few months to give you more time. But when you can, give me an update on it, huh?
Thankful for the extension, he pondered what would happen to Carrie. But his mind refused to go there, to that imagined place. Reality hit him hard last night, and now it wouldn't let go. Two things troubled him. First, that he was having such a reaction to the woman he'd just met. Why did he care how she felt next to him, or the way she looked at him? Second, why was he entertaining the idea that a possible romance could exist between them? And he had dared to touch her. What had he been thinking? What had she been thinking of that move? He put a hand to his head and huffed. The room that had just felt cool and airy suddenly became claustrophobic. He needed to get out of here for a while. Grabbing his keys, he sauntered to the Toyota, already feeling freer as he inhaled the spring air. He decided to cruise down to Hollywood and visit some of the shops. Maybe the reality hit would reshape itself into inspiration. As usual, the parking proved sparse, but after several moments of circling the block, he managed to tuck his car into a spot. A good number of people crowded the street, some with bags full of merchandise flung from their arms, others excitedly window shopping, couples gazing at outdoor displays and each other. And finally others, like him, single and searching for something to occupy their mind. Having skipped breakfast, his stomach now grumbled, and he quickly turned into a bakery. His senses immediately heightened as the smell of sweet rolls, sugar cookies, and buttery biscuits filled the air. He ordered 2 biscuits and a cup of black coffee. He didn't realize his mouth was watering until the butter hit his tongue. He savored the taste of everything for a few moments before continuing his walk down the street. He kept to himself to the left, near the store windows, to avoid the clusters of people that swarmed like bees, buzzing with conversation and moving swiftly. It was difficult to see couples. There seemed to be so many of them, more than usual. He felt his heart drop a little. He came to a pet store. A cluster of kittens played behind the window pane. They acted so carefree, it almost made him a little jealous. He chuckled, enjoying the moment. Heading inside, Shawn strolled down the aisles, admiring the array of animals for sale. Boasting the largest and most varied selection in Southern California, the pet shop stocked everything from exotic snakes to mini pigs. It was like an indoor zoo. He used to come in here with his parents when he was in elementary school. He'd grown up with a lot of cats and dogs, and weirdly, the pets had all gotten along. Now, walking along the aisles, he found the browsing experience to be a bit therapeutic. He'd lived alone for years, and felt alone for months, and seeing the playful interaction of the animals brought him a bit of joy. And then he came to a display of puppies. There were at least a dozen of them hopping around, a couple of them snoozing. He pressed his face to the glass, the way he used to do when he was a child. There were Dobermans, German Shepherds, Beagles, Labrador Retrievers. And then there were those more inherent of Hollywood celebrities, like Yorkies and Pomeranians, and a few mixed breeds. But only one caught his eye. A golden retriever, maybe 3 or 4 months old, frolicked with another puppy. In high school, for his 16th birthday, his parents surprised him with one present, a golden retriever puppy. Shawn had been so taken with him that he would bring him everywhere he went. 10 years later, he passed from cancer. Shawn hadn't been able to even think of owning another pet until now. This particular golden retriever was watching him closely, as if begging him to take her home. At just that moment, a salesperson approached him. "Find something you like?" The guy looked barely 15, his teeth gleaming with braces. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I have." He pointed to the retriever. "Ah, our youngest female. Yes, she came to us when her parents died, just after all of her siblings found homes. Even though she's only a few months old, her maturity level is at an adult level. She's very intuitive. We've had a lot of guests express interest in her, but you are the first person she's expressed interest in." How interesting that her parents and his were both gone. Maybe that's why he was drawn to her. He'd sensed they had something in common. "Would you like to see her?" Shawn nodded and waited for the teen to bring her to him as he waited in a closed-off area where potential owner and pet could get to know each other for a few minutes. Once he held the pup in his arms, he found himself delighting in their communion. She kept licking his chin and pawing at his chest, whining happily as though to say that he should pick her. Feeling like this was meant to be, he let the employee know that he would be getting the puppy. After filling out the paperwork and picking up all the necessary doggy supplies, Shawn forgot about the rest of his shopping spree and drove immediately home. On their way there, she couldn't seem to get enough of the scenery, her paws and face pressed against the passenger window. She barked a couple of times, her tail wagging, impatient to explore her new world. As though she'd lived here her whole life, the golden girl skipped around the beach house, inspecting each room with an exorbitant amount of zest. It was incredible how quickly the silence of the house disappeared, replaced with the sound of energy and happiness. "Come here, girl," he called instantly she came to him. "Wow, you're a good listener. Let's see if you can sit." She immediately sat. "Wow, that was terrific, girl." He rubbed her head. She emitted a short squeal. "You hungry?" Her mouth fell open as though she understood his words. He moved into the kitchen and poured her a bowl of puppy food and filled a saucer of water. Eagerly, she set about eating, making little grunting noises as she did. Shawn laughed. "Glad you're enjoying it. Well, I can't just keep calling you girl. You need a name. You're such a wonderful little dog. Wonderful." He thought back to one of his favorite movies, It's a Wonderful Life. In it, there was a little girl who stole the hearts of America. Zuzu. Shawn peered over at his new dog, who was happily lapping away at her water. Zuzu, the perfect name. Sweet and happy just like her. What do you think? The puppy looked up from one of her drinking spree and barked once. Well, I guess it's settled. Shawn smiled and rubbed her coat. He didn't feel so alone anymore, but still, something seemed to be missing. No, not something. Someone. Shelly's face floated before his vision. She seemed outgoing when she was unaware of being watched. Funny how nervous and quiet she got at the movies. He didn't want to admit it. But he wondered if she were thinking of him, too. Chapter 12. So, you just shook his hand and that was it?
Brandon poured himself a glass of water in Shelly's kitchen. Yeah, what did you expect? She could feel heat flooding her face. Her brother came around to the living room, where she was sitting with her feet tucked beneath her favorite couch.
Shelly, my dear sister, I get the feeling that there is more going on here than just a handshake.
He paused for dramatic effect as he sipped his drink and peered over the rim of the glass. She sighed, knowing he wouldn't let it go until she divulged more information. Even those things she didn't want to admit. It was tough having an older brother sometimes. She made room for him on the couch. Okay, so I like him.
What's he like?
The doorbell rang. Shelly studied her brother. Did you invite someone?
No.
She went to answer the door. It was Lana. What are you doing here? Well, nice to see you too. I just wasn't expecting you. Lana laughed. Clearly. She shut the door behind her and they started toward Brandon. So, what's the verdict? Shelly looked back at her. Huh? You know, with Shawn. Yay or nay? Smirking, she gaped at her brother and best friend. You two are too much.
Hey, I'm just looking out for you. You know, like you would do for me.
Nobody said a word, both of them staring at Shelly in anticipation. Seriously? Is this really the focus of our night? And you didn't plan this together? She shot Brandon a look.
Actually, no.
He smiled.
We just know you so well.
What does that mean? Lana said, Shell, I noticed how nervous you were at the movies. So quiet. So unlike yourself. Brandon smirked.
Kind of like right now. Plus, you didn't call me back, which tells me that your mind has been in a whirlwind.
She laughed. You guys are ridiculous. You take a couple of things and decide I'm head over heels? She shook her head, still laughing, plucked Brandon's drink from his grip, and dumped the water in the sink.
Aha! Now I know for sure that you are,
Brandon said, a big, annoying grin on his face. What are you talking about?
You only get mad at me when I'm right.
He had her there. Darn it. She folded her arms in front of her. Yes, I like him. Happy? They both nodded with big, fat, goofy grins on their faces. She sighed, realizing she'd been defeated. Her true feelings were out now. I have work to do, she announced. It was an excuse to get them to leave, but it was also the truth. But I just got here, Lana protested. Sorry, friend, but I really don't want to get any more behind. She squeezed her best friend by and high-fived her brother as they left. With the house to herself, she went right to work, typing up the numbers from the premiere and prepping a flyer for the next event. She could have used Lana's help, but she really just wanted to be left alone to think about her new feelings. She wondered what Shawn was doing right now. What he did for work, what his hobbies were. Why had he shown up to the premiere? He hadn't expressed interest in a pet. Had someone dragged him there? Did he even like pets? Shelly laughed. What questions were next in her mind? What was his favorite color? She felt like such a kid. Feeling the pull from work, she immersed herself in the administrative aspect of the business. She enjoyed working with numbers. It kept her mind busy. And she needed to keep it preoccupied as much as possible. Especially after that touch. She knew that something in his gray-blue eyes liked her. She couldn't deny it when the second movie had ended at the drive-in. But when he ran his fingers along her hand, her whole body had felt like it was electrified. Unable to focus on the work before her, she thought of the way he lingered at the truck, like he really didn't want to leave just yet. Or had she imagined that? Was he just being polite? But then how did that explain the way he touched her hand? Groaning, she dropped her head into her hands. What was happening to her? God, she mumbled, is it really safe to fall in love again? Chapter 13.
When Shawn left the house the next day with Zuzu, he walked into a pool of sunshine. It was one of those days where the sky was all blue and the breeze softly rolled over one's skin in lazy waves. You like the beach as much as I do, girl. Sorry, Zuzu. The dog peered up at him as he held her on a leash. She blinked and then returned her attention to the ocean, as though answering him in the affirmative. Well, unfortunately, they don't let dogs on the beach. Zuzu barked gruffly. I agree, but we can always visit another beach that does. Today, though, we are headed to my favorite coffee shop, aptly called Spilling the Beans. They sell doggy treats, too. Would you like that? Her eyes were fixed on the ocean. We'll do the sand soon, I promise. How did you sleep? She glanced back at him and yawned. I didn't think so. Too bad dogs can't have coffee. That would wake you up. He let her sit in the front where he cracked the passenger window, just enough for her to stick her head through. Several minutes later, they arrived at the coffee shop. It was unusually busy, probably a lunch rush. Shawn typically got his caffeine early in the morning, sometimes before the sun came up, and just before he went to work on a novel. Today, however, he was taking the day off to spend some time with his new pet. The wait was 15 minutes, but worth it. His favorite black Java in hand, Shawn bent to scoot a dog biscuit into Zuzu's mouth. He found a table for two and secured her leash to the chair leg. She chewed happily on her treat as he sipped his drink. Having breathed in just enough of the fresh air, Shawn whispered to Zuzu, I know a secret pathway. He stood and took hold of her leash. Looking at him quizzically, she bounced eagerly forward as he walked her down an alleyway, the south side of the buildings facing them. It's quiet back here. Away from all the noise, you know. A soft little whine escaped her as though she awaited further explanation. I'm not one for crowds. Plus, I'm able to think better when there's not a lot to distract me. They strolled in silence, the sound of the busy cafe far behind them. But when they neared the end of the block, they heard a shrill scream. Before Shawn could react, Zuzu broke free of his grip and raced down the alley, her red leash flying in the wind. He hurried after her. The startled shout of a deep male voice suddenly punctuated the air. Shawn pumped his arms faster. As he neared the corner, he slowed his pace. There, circling an older woman who seemed scared out of her wits, was Zuzu. And just a few feet away, a group of 10 or so people crowded around the woman, as though forming a protective circle, while a cop handcuffed a bulging man. Everything about the man bulged, his big cheekbones, the scowl on his face, his gut. If the situation weren't dire, Shawn might have laughed.
Oh, mister, you should be proud of your little lady.
The older woman wore her silvery hair short, and she was breathing hard, her cheeks blotchy. One of her hands rested across her chest, and she used the other to rub Zuzu's golden head. What happened? Are you okay? Shawn asked as he took Zuzu's leash.
I was just leaving my little antique shop to go to lunch when this horrible man jumped me out of nowhere. He grabbed my purse and started to take off, but your precious little girl came running to my defense.
She scared him off, huh? Shawn grinned. He couldn't help but notice that the crowd had gotten considerably closer and had multiplied by probably 10 or more people. The woman touched Shawn's arm.
Boy, did she ever. She nipped that guy so hard in the butt that he jumped a foot or so in the air.
She held both hands to her chest as someone brought her a large cup of water. The group of 20, swiftly growing to 25, gasped and murmured approvals. The police officer made her way through the crowd as her partner hauled off the burglar. She held something out to the silvery-haired woman.
Ma'am, your purse.
She gladly accepted it and clutched it to her chest.
Oh, thank you so much. There are still good people in this world.
She looked at Zuzu.
And doggies.
She patted her head, thanked Shawn for his watchful dog, and then turned her attention to the police officers to answer questions for their report. Anxious to get away from the crowd, feeling air getting jammed into his lungs, Shawn hurried the two of them away, back toward his haven, the coffee shop.
Excuse me! Excuse me!
A young woman's voice plowed through the air from behind them. Shawn continued heading to his destination, the parking lot, where he intended to hop right into his car and head back home where things were quiet and safe.
Sir, please stop.
The voice was much closer now. Turning on his heel, Shawn saw a frazzled woman trying to flag him down. Out of breath, she came to a halt just a foot from his nose.
Thank you for stopping.
Sure. She spread her palms on her knees and gulped a deep breath of air, Then standing upright, she looked down at Zuzu before turning to face Shawn.
What just happened back there?
Some guy robbed a lady. Thankfully, he didn't get very far.
Thanks to your puppy here.
Yeah, I guess so.
Mind if I ask you a few more questions?
Sure. To his surprise, she reached into a bag that he hadn't noticed before and pulled out a microphone. Practically shoving it into his face, she said,
Your full name?
Look, I didn't do anything here. Laughing like he just made a joke, the woman said,
Well, we certainly can't interview a dog, can we?
Without thinking, he said, Shawn.
Don't you have a last name?
Look, I really don't want to be in the news or anything, so if you don't mind. The woman gave him a strange look.
Hey, wait a minute. I know who you are. You're that billionaire's son, Johnny Henderson.
Her eyes popped out as though she just solved a difficult puzzle. Shawn put up a hand. I really must be going. He hurried out of there without looking back until he was safely inside his car. His heart pattered and his hands had become so sweaty that they slid off the steering wheel. Zuzu sat panting out the window, exhausted from the feat she'd accomplished. Shawn was amazed by his new companion. The guy at the pet store hadn't exaggerated when he said she was mature. He wondered at her intuition. She was about as mysterious as the elusive romance novel he was working on. Let's go home, he said, more to himself, grateful to get out of there as soon as possible.
Chapter 14. Did you read the paper today? Lana was on the other end of Shelly's cell phone. Frowning at her bedroom clock, she wondered if the battery had died. Lana, am I reading the time right? Is it actually 6:30 in the morning? Yes, I couldn't wait to talk to you. Yawning big, Shelly moaned. What is so important that you had to wake me from my deep slumber? Turn on the news. Shelly picked up the TV remote on her nightstand and clicked on the news. A young woman stood near a row of buildings at the end of an alleyway. She was broadcasting to a news anchor who listened attentively behind his desk in the newsroom. Locals were drawn to the scene when an elderly woman was heard screaming. A man had just grabbed her purse when a little golden retriever caught the guy before he could get away. Into the phone, Shelly said, Okay, so? Wait for it, Lana replied. The reporter continued. But this isn't the only incredible part of the story. Just a few feet down this very alleyway, I encountered the son of the late CEO of Value Cinema, Johnny Henderson, Shawn Henderson himself, and apparently the proud owner of this special dog who saved the day. The late Henderson left a majority of his estate to his only child when he passed away a few weeks ago. Behind the news anchor's head, a large picture of Shawn Henderson appeared. Can you believe it? Lana said. Shelly shook her head before realizing Lana couldn't see her. No. Incredible, isn't it? Not only is he handsome, he's rich and likes dogs. Shelly had never cared too much about money. As long as she could pay her bills, she was happy. So why should his financial status change the way she looked at him now? Like he wasn't just a mystery man, but an unattainable mystery man. Shelly said, I'll talk to you later. I'm going to finish sleeping. As she lay back on her pillow, she tried to puzzle out her changing thoughts about Shawn. Wonder, confusion, awe. Shelly knew a little bit about Johnny Henderson, that he'd acquired massive wealth through his enterprise over the years, making him a billionaire. On the TV, the reporter was exchanging an exclaimed expression with the news anchor over Shawn Henderson's newfound status. Now, Mr. Henderson is no longer a millionaire, but a billionaire, folks, she announced. A millionaire already? He didn't strike her as someone with money. He seemed so nice and simple. Well, now, that's a shallow thought. Millionaires can be nice and simple, too. She sat up, unable to go back to sleep. She switched off the TV and turned on the one in the living room adjacent to the kitchen, where she pulled out a package of uncooked bacon and a carton of eggs and set about cooking both in the same pan. She liked the blended flavor of grease and yolk, but her mind strayed to what she had just learned. Would a billionaire be just as nice? She laughed, feeling ridiculous. He already had money, far more than she'd ever made. Perhaps she lacked imagination. But what did he do to make his money? Invest it? Get a 6-figure job right out of high school? She stirred the food, listening to it sizzle and pop over the high flame. I'll have to ask him when I see him again. She laughed again. Right, like it's any of my business. Our very own billionaire bachelor. Shelly whirled from the stove. The reporter winked at the camera as she finished her report. Now, why should what she said bother Shelly? Shawn didn't belong to her. They didn't have a commitment. Nevertheless, thrusting that title upon him bothered her. She wondered if Shawn had seen the news yet, and if it bothered him too. She ate her early breakfast in silence as the sun splashed through the partially curtained windows. A few hours later, after she'd showered and worked on some spreadsheets for the charity, her cell phone rang. Hello? It was quiet on the other end for a few seconds, and she was getting ready to hang up. Spammers didn't answer right away. She suspected these must be one of those calls. Shelly? A male's voice came through. Yes? It must be a client. Other than Brandon, no guy's ever called her. This is Shawn. From the other night? Shelly's heart skipped. Shawn? I hope you don't mind. Lana said it would be okay for me to call. More than okay. Oh, sure. How are you? The question had a double meaning. It was the kind of question people got asked all the time, but she also wanted to know his reaction to the news, which he surely must be aware of by now. I'm fine. Actually, I am calling to see if you would like to go for some coffee. I don't like coffee. Why had she said that? Coffee in this context meant a date, not necessarily literally drinking a cup of coffee. But if he picked up on her embarrassment, he didn't show it. Or we could do something else. I mean, if you want to. He added quickly. Yes, of course. I'm sorry, coffee is fine. But you just said you don't like coffee. A date, right? That's what you really mean? She bit her tongue. Better to just stay quiet. His laugh sounded a little nervous. Yeah. You know, it's a nice day outside. Maybe we could go for a walk on the beach. That did sound nice. That sounds good. Which beach? How about the one where we sort of ran into each other at Mario's a couple of weeks ago? Long Beach, right? Yes. That sounds good. Seriously? Is that all she could think to say? She sounded like a broken record. She was boring herself. What if he decided her vocabulary was too limited to keep his interest? His voice seemed lighter, though. Would you mind if I brought my puppy? I just got her and thought you'd like to meet her. Maybe he didn't notice after all. Sure. Great. Meet you at the taco stand in about 45 minutes. After they hung up, she said, I have to text Lana to scold her and thank her. Shelly, how could you? Lana, huh? Shelly, you gave him my number. Lana, oh, that. In spite of your remarks, I have a funny suspicion that you're not upset. Shelly sighed. Lana knew her too well. Shelly, because I'm not. Lana, what are you guys doing today? Shelly flinched. How did she know? Shelly, how do you know we're doing anything? She waited for Lana's reply, then finally gave in. Shelly, okay, fine, we are. He's meeting me at Mario's and we're going to walk on the beach. Lana, how romantic. Shelly, yes, it is. Shelly found herself suddenly anxious to get ready. Shelly, I'll talk to you later. Lana, please do. Shaking her head, she closed the message and cleaned up the kitchen a bit before checking herself in the mirror. As usual, her long wavy hair did little but hang past her shoulders. It didn't have much of an imagination, but at least it was predictable. When she glanced at her watch, she was surprised to see that 30 minutes had already passed. Shelly got to the parking lot a few minutes early. She stepped outside and sat at one of the vacant benches. It was late morning, just before the lunch rush hour. Only 3 other people were present at the restaurant.
Shelly?
A voice said from behind her. She must have been in a daze because she startled. Turning, she saw Shawn standing behind her. He was wearing light blue jeans and a long-sleeved gray shirt, a simple outfit that he managed to make look amazing. His puppy panted happily by his side. She got up from the bench and smiled down at the animal.
Shelly, meet Zuzu. Zuzu, meet my friend Shelly.
The puppy yipped once and nuzzled her mane against Shelly's dangling hand.
Shawn laughed. I think she wants you to pet her.
Laughing too, she reached down to stroke the pup's head. She's beautiful. Is she a pure golden retriever? Shawn nodded. You know, I've been meaning to ask why you attended the charity event. Were you looking for a dog?
Actually, no. At least not then. I used to have a golden retriever, but he died a while back. I saw this little one, and it just seemed destined to be.
He studied her, just as she found herself gazing at him. Her heart tried to beat, but it paused for a couple of seconds. She coughed, just as they broke eye contact. Do you like the beach? She asked Zuzu, trying to breathe through her heart that was now hammering. Wagging her tail in response, Zuzu licked Shelly's hand.
I wish we could explore the beach where I live, but they don't allow dogs,
he said. It just occurred to her that Shawn might not live in Carson. Where do you live? She turned to look at him.
I'm in the Malibu colony.
She gasped. She didn't mean to. It's just that she'd never personally known anybody who lived in that area where tons of superstars lived. Thankfully, he didn't seem to notice. But then she realized what a drive he'd just taken. No wonder he had pushed it out 45 minutes. He'd driven all the way from Malibu just to see her.
Ready?
He gestured toward the ocean. She nodded. The 3 of them made their way to the shore. Because it was in the middle of the week, the beach was nearly barren. It was almost like the whole ocean belonged to them. Shelly didn't know what to say once they started their stroll. She wanted Shawn to initiate the discussion, especially because she didn't know his mood yet, how he felt about the news. She didn't want to step over any boundaries, make him uncomfortable. Maybe he didn't know about the report yet. So, have you seen the news? The words were out of her mouth before she could put them back. She bit her lip and groaned inside.
You saw me, huh?
He seemed more curious as to how she felt. Yeah.
How did I look?
She turned. He was smiling at her as though the announcement of his wealth didn't faze him. Fine, I mean, it didn't bother you? Did you know they would be televising it?
Not exactly. This woman ran up to me after Zuzu here prevented the robber from getting away. I suspected she might be with the news. I got out of there as fast as I could.
I didn't know that was your dad. I love value cinema. There's no place like it. Sorry, Shawn, about your dad. She felt for him. She knew all too well what it was like to lose your father.
Thank you. It hasn't been easy. I really miss him.
A long wave washed across the sand, the water arching around her feet.
You lost your father, too. You started the charity.
She nodded. It happened about a year ago. He had a stroke. It hasn't been the easiest time. I'm just glad we were close. Not wanting to dwell on the loss, she said, Hey, how about we go barefoot?
Why not?
He pulled off his shoes. He was wearing white sneakers, as she took off her sandals. But he was peeling off his last sock. He lost his balance and fell into her. To brace himself, he grabbed hold of her hand. His fingers were nice and warm against her cooled hand.
Sorry,
he said, straightening himself back up. No worries. Other than her heart drumming like mad, again. When she looked down, Zuzu positioned herself between them, her soft brown eyes staring up at them. Grinning, she patted the dog's head. They walked in silence down the shore for a few minutes. What Shawn did for a living kept tugging at her. Was it too soon to ask? She didn't want to sound nosy, or worse, superficial.
How do you like Carson?
Shawn asked. It's okay. Not the best neighborhood. More silence. Great. He was going to regret having asked her on a date. Why couldn't she think of anything nice to say?
How's the charity going?
Oh, good. Better than I expected, actually. Had a pretty good turnout at the premiere. We're running another event in Hollywood in a couple of months.
We?
Oh, Lana and me. She's been such a big help with coordinating everything.
She seems like a great person. Corey's pretty taken with her. Think I'm going to have to change my assessment of his views on love.
What do you mean?
Well, he's always been pretty doubtful about love. But he's different lately, like he really likes your friend. I think he might be giving love a real chance.
Really?
Yeah. Is that bad? I mean, for Lana? Is she not wanting to commit?
Oh no, that's the farthest thing from the truth. She likes Corey. A lot. I told her to slow down. The interesting thing is, though, she doesn't think they're moving too fast. Shawn chuckled. What's so funny?
I told Corey the same thing. And he said what Lana said.
They had a good laugh about that. Zuzu looked up at them, her ears perked up. Since Shawn had brought up her career, it seemed safe to inquire about his. So, what do you do for work?
Have you heard of Plagued, the sci-fi series?
Yeah.
I'm the author.
You? But I thought Robert Steller wrote those.
Pen name.
Her mouth dropped open. My brother loves your books.
Your brother, huh?
He grinned. Feeling bad, she quickly said, I haven't read any of them. Sorry.
Don't apologize. Do you like romance?
She was caught off guard. What?
Maybe sci-fi isn't your thing, so I thought maybe you liked romance instead.
Yeah, I have read a few. She felt her cheeks burning. Nothing too graphic, she quickly added. He stopped to look at her, his grin friendly and soft with his lips slightly parted like Clint Eastwood's, the actor, not the characters he played. Her heart dissolved into a puddle.
I'm only asking because I'm writing one right now.
You are? Now that they were face to face, the blue in his eyes seemed brighter than before as he stared right at her.
I hope you don't think I'm corny or anything, but do you believe in love? Romantic love?
Suddenly, she found herself being pulled toward him. Not metaphorically pulled, but literally, physically pulled toward him. Frowning, she looked down to see that Zuzu was trotting in a circle and had managed to wrap her leash around their legs, forcing their bodies closer together until their noses were only a couple of inches apart. Embarrassed, Shawn apologized.
Zuzu, you got us all tangled up. Silly girl.
He struggled with her leash, working to untangle it. It's not so bad, she said. Shawn paused to look up at Shelly. Oh no. She'd said that aloud. She closed her eyes, but when she opened them, Shawn had finished untangling them and was watching her, a smile on his face.
I feel the same way.
He told her. He touched her hand. She practically melted.
What are you looking for in a guy?
What? She didn't think she could be caught off guard so many times in one day.
I'm asking for 2 reasons. I need help with my novel. Romance is out of my comfort zone. I want to make sure I get things right, especially from the female's point of view. I hear that most women want to get married, have a family, but I don't know if that's really true.
Oh, she said, relieved he was only asking for fiction reasons. Most women want a man who will commit, who makes her feel special. Well, Lana doesn't seem too interested in those things. I mean, she really likes Corey, but I've never seen her get too serious. I had a few girlfriends in college. Most of them were definitely wanting marriage, the whole family thing. So yes, in my experience, most of them do. Shawn grew quiet. Had she said something wrong? She noticed that he hadn't moved his hand. Then she remembered that he mentioned he had 2 reasons for asking his question. You said you had 2 reasons? He let go of her hand and looked straight at her.
What about you?
Me?
What do you look for in a guy?
She swallowed. Her mind went to Rick. Kind, giving, faithful. She thought he was what she wanted. Indeed, he had been. At first. But he had just been playing a role. Someone who is genuine, who will stay faithful, who will love me no matter what. No matter how bad life gets. He seemed to be studying her. Why are you looking at me like that?
It's just that I've never known someone like you. You seem so...
He seemed to be struggling for words.
So real.
Oh?
Have you ever been in love?
Darn it, caught off guard again. Yeah.
You don't have to talk about it. I didn't mean to cross a line.
For some reason, she felt compelled to share her past with him. I was married for 3 years to a guy I thought was great, but he turned out to be not so great. He left me soon after our 3rd anniversary. I was blind and stupid. I didn't even realize he'd been unfaithful the whole time we were married. He met her before we even exchanged vows. She shook her head, unwilling to say any more. Shawn's hand lay on hers, his fingers sliding around her own. He squeezed her hand. Automatically, she squeezed back, surprising herself.
I was in love once, too.
What happened?
Her name was Bridget. I often imagined her as my future bride. The two of us running through the house with the kids, or just the two of us staring out at the beach. That family dream died 6 months ago.
He inhaled deeply, as though it was difficult to go on.
I asked her to marry me. She laughed.
Shelly gasped. That's horrible. He nodded.
It was humiliating.
What happened?
She left me for a multimillionaire. I was only worth about $3 million then.
The air that had just felt heavy suddenly released the sadness and replaced it with laughter. They actually held on to each other, giggling like little kids. When at last they were able to breathe again, Shelly said, "And now you're a billionaire." That only made the laughter start up again. Shawn's face was actually red. He was laughing so hard. Zuzu hopped onto his knee and he scooted backward, falling into the sand. Still trying to get over the second round of giggle fits, Shelly plopped down beside him. They both eventually calmed down. They sat side by side for a while. The tide started to come in. Shelly said, "Rick."
What?
His name was Rick. He divorced me 2 years ago.
Have you given up on love?
She glanced down at their intertwined hands, her eyes darting to the surf, then back at his face. "No," she whispered. As she stared at him, she realized that what she spoke was the truth. Chapter 15.
Zuzu woke him by pulling off his blanket. "Oh, is it time for me to get up?" Shawn laughed as he slid into his slippers. She panted and hopped and turned around in a circle. "You want to play, huh? Well, I'm still a bit tired, but I believe there's a special toy for you." Her little ears perked up. He reached between the nightstand and bed and produced a squishy tennis ball. As soon as he tossed it to her, she had it in her mouth, the ball squeaking with delight as she paraded around the room. After getting dressed, he checked his phone to find that he had missed several calls. The first one was from Misty, the second from Corey, and the last 2 from unknown numbers. As he brewed a pot of coffee, he listened to Misty's message.
"Shawn, have you seen the news? Call me."
That was it. Frowning, he switched on the TV in the living room as he played the next message. Corey's was essentially the same as Misty's, except that it said he was on his way over. He set the phone down and flipped through the channels, until he saw his picture, the same one as before, plastered over half of the screen. But it wasn't just his picture. He was on the cover of People magazine. The same news anchor looked like she could barely keep a straight professional stance as she relayed the latest.
With value cinema booming more than ever, Shawn Henderson must be reeling from his newfound status.
The close-up of his face zoomed out, the rest of the magazine zooming into full view. The headline read, "Most Desirable Man Alive." No, this had to be a nightmare.
After his adorable puppy prevented a robber from escaping, and after inheriting his father's estate, Henderson has certainly earned his new title.
Disgusted, he shut the TV off and stalked back to the kitchen. As the coffee finished brewing, he pressed his head against the freezer and closed his eyes. He had forgotten about the business, the house. They were his responsibilities now. He needed to take care of those things, as hard as it might be. But now his face was everywhere, making those tasks more challenging. He felt something cold on his knee. Opening his eyes, he found Zuzu's wet nose pressed against his leg, the ball hanging out of her mouth. He scratched her little head. Looks like you're a superstar. Definitely a hero, girl. She barked once and galloped away, the ball squeaking constantly. He played the last 2 messages. The first one was from a local journalist who wanted to interview him about his newfound fame. The second message was from Bridget.
I saw you on the news. We have a lot to talk about. Call me.
Stunned, he dropped the phone onto the counter, took a swig of coffee, and returned Misty's call.
Shawn, it's horrible, I know. How are you holding up? Do you want me to come over?
Please. A few minutes later, she was at the door. Her red pixie cut was frayed, and her fiery eyes matched its color. The news wants my story, he told her as he let her in. Coffee?
Yes, please. Are you going to give it to them?
He handed her a mug. I have no desire to be in the news, but it's already too late. Her silver bracelets jangled against each other as she took a drink. As if responding to a personal command, Zuzu came running, nearly knocking Misty over.
There's the famous girl. You are so totally cute.
She bent down to stroke her head.
It's nice to meet you.
Zuzu barked happily and dropped the ball, sitting patiently at her feet. Misty laughed and lightly tossed it across the floor. Zuzu scrambled to her feet and swooped it up like a gull retrieving a fish. There was a knock at the door then, a light, friendly knock. Who is that? He asked Misty.
I don't live here.
Oh, right. He set down his cup. Corey said he was on his way. He swung open the door to find a host of people crowding the street. Before he could blink, microphones were being shoved into his face.
Mr. Henderson, what do you think of your newfound fame? How does it feel to be the most desirable man alive?
Is it true there's a new lady in your life?
How does it feel to be a billionaire?
Shawn felt the air growing too thick, his heart racing, his hands turning clammy. His body experienced chills and sweats all at once. He attempted to respond, but the only thing he could think to say to all of those questions was, I don't know.
Mr. Henderson has no further comment. Thank you for your understanding.
Misty flashed a curt smile and slammed the door in their faces. Thank you. Nothing. She put a hand to his back, steering him to the dinette where she gently pushed him into his seat. Before he could mutter another incohesive phrase, she was sticking a steaming cup of coffee under his nose. He gratefully took it, sipping it for several seconds. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here.
That was totally uncalled for. I mean, sure, they're the paparazzi, but to just show up at your home? Whatever, it was like a raid.
She grew silent, letting him savor the rest of his coffee.
What does it feel like to be the most desirable man alive?
He looked at her. She was smirking at him. He groaned.
On a more serious note, Shawn, you're going to have to consider serious protection. These guys aren't going to leave you alone. Now that you're all over the news, you'll need to hire some bodyguards.
He groaned again.
I know, that's the last thing you want. Unfortunately, it's totally necessary.
My parents had maids and cooks on site when I was a kid. It was all I ever knew, so it didn't seem strange or anything. In fact, for the longest time, I used to think they were relatives living with us. Misty laughed.
I guess that's a good thing.
But it wasn't until after my mom died that he needed bodyguards.
So, does your dad still have them on staff?
Actually, yes. I guess it's time to make a phone call. I need to check on the house, on everyone, anyway. Someone rapped on the door. They both turned toward it warily. I'm checking the cameras this time. Shawn spotted Corey lingering there, looking nervously around. Shawn let him in quickly. Dude, what's going on out there? He gestured behind him. Paparazzi, my new friends. Shawn mumbled. Oh, wild. Hey, Nice picture on the news. I can see why you're the most. Shawn held up a hand. Don't say it. I'm going to hear enough of it as it is. He plopped back into his seat and buried his face in his hands. Want to go with me to my dad's, check on the staff, inquire about bodyguard protection for me? He muttered through his fingers. Corey slapped his shoulder. You got it. Shawn dropped his hands and checked on the cameras. The chaotic crowd had dispersed, all of them getting into their cars. He blew out a big breath of air. To Misty, Corey said, How about you, Misty? Do you know who they are? Are they harassing you? They're not into his books, are they? I mean, his pen name is still safeguarding him, right?
Stellar is safe, she said, which means so am I.
To Shawn,
which means it's probably best you use a pen name for your romance, too, unless, of course, you want more media attention.
No thanks.
Well, I gotta go, guys. Keep me updated on things. Let me know if there's anything I can do.
She turned at the door.
Hey, wait a minute. Is there a young lady in your life?
Corey's widening grin said it all.
Mysterious. Well, take care.
She winked as she let herself out. Zuzu padded into the dinette to greet Corey. Well, hello. It's nice to meet you, Zuzu. Corey patted her head. Shawn put in a call to his dad, speaking with Joy, the head maid, alerting her to his visit. Let's hit the road, Corey. To Zuzu, he said, Have fun, but not too much fun, okay? She looked at him curiously. I got some business to do. He filled her food in water bowls, rubbed her head, and headed out to his car with Corey in tow. Though Shawn had grown up in his parents' home, it had been over a month since he'd visited its grounds. Without his dad being here felt even stranger. He felt his body sag with sadness, and he and Corey made his way to the entrance. The property afforded the occupants a lot of privacy, as it was set several yards back from the street. The home sat on a plot of over 20 acres, surrounded by several trees. It was unique from most of the neighboring residences, in that its walls and floors were made entirely out of wood, and each room featured open-beamed ceilings. 2 gardeners were busy pruning some of the bushes. Though the bodyguards were discreet, Shawn immediately noticed them patrolling the property. Having been accustomed to seeing them for years, though, some of them were new additions, as a few of them had retired recently. Aaron, the lead guard, headed toward them. He'd been the first bodyguard employed. He was also Shawn's favorite. Mr. Shawn, good to see you. Aaron's professional stony face instantly melted into one of pleasure. Aaron, it's good to see you too. Shawn hugged him and stepped back as he looked to Corey. Mr. Corey, a pleasure, as always. To Shawn, he said, I suppose the news has brought you here? Well, yes, but I needed to come by anyway. Sorry to have neglected everyone for so long. Aaron waved his hand in the air. Nonsense. We all understand that you need time to adjust. You take all the time in the world. We're not going anywhere. For some reason, his statement made him feel hurt and peace all at once. That means a lot to me. Thank you. Thank you for taking such good care of everything. What do you need? Do we need to make changes? He shook his head. All is well here, though I suspect it won't be long until the media is sticking their noses in. We're ready for that. I think you are the priority. Your home, your whereabouts. You just say the word, and you'll have 24-hour protection straight away. The word. They all laughed. I would like it if you could be my lead guard. Aaron looked honored and humbled at the request. As you wish, Mr. Shawn. Might I also suggest 2 more to attend to us? Whatever you deem necessary. Is it true that there's a lady in your life again? Oh, Aaron, not you too, he joked. No, not for my personal interest, just for professional reasons. If you and this nice lady continue to be together, I anticipate that she might not have much privacy of her own. Just let her know to be cautious. Shawn nodded, despising the thought that Shelly's life should be disrupted because of him. Before them, the modest home looked picturesque. Behind the glorious green landscape, when he lived here, Shawn felt safe, enjoying a carefree life where servants tended to his every need. Now, having suddenly acquired far more wealth than he was used to, and without the presence of his parents, he didn't feel that same sense of security. With a heavy sense of grief and worry, He followed Corey and Aaron inside. Instantly, he felt homesick. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The most important part of this place, his dad, was missing. But there were traces of him everywhere. The paintings of the house that he'd done, the portraits of their family that he'd taken with his camera timer. Even the balustrades were specially hand-carved by him, rich mahogany with intricate patterns of swirls and soft edges. Shawn steadied himself against the railing now. Corey touched his friend's arm. "Hey, you need to sit down? It's just weird being here without him. Let's head to the kitchen." A few maids glanced up as they entered, their smiles familiar and pleasant as they greeted them. Samantha, the newest maid, having worked there for just the past year, said,
"Mr. Shawn, we have missed you. It's wonderful to see you again."
"Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for being good to my father, especially in his last days." In the few times he'd come over in the past year, she and Joy, the head maid, had been attentive to his and his father's every need. Sure, that was their job, but they actually enjoyed it, and that's what endeared Shawn to them, to all of the staff. Not once did anyone express ingratitude. Indeed, not only did they appreciate and work, they had loved his parents and him as though they were family. That sense of family felt stronger even now. Joy emerged from the kitchen as they approached it. Her long black hair was tied back in a tight bun, and her big brown eyes looked as youthful as the day she joined the staff over 20 years before.
"Mr. Shawn!"
she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him.
"Mr. Corey!"
She hugged him almost as tightly. To Shawn, she said, barely keeping tears out of her eyes,
"I was so worried about you. Those horrible reporters."
"Thank you, Joy. I'm okay."
"Oh, sweet boy, don't let them get you down."
It tickled him how she still referred to him as a boy.
"They are monsters, nosy little monsters."
Indeed, they can be. But Aaron will be my main guy now. I have supreme protection. Don't you worry. He turned to Aaron. "Do I need to look on the outside for more surveillance?" "I got it covered." Feeling relieved, Shawn nodded. Sure, he'd grown up in the care of personal attendants, but he'd never had to worry about things like hiring. And he'd been on his own for so long now that the idea of having an entourage of guards seemed odd. He wished he could talk to his dad right now, ask him about how it was to have bodyguards surrounding him all the time. "Is there anything that you need?" He turned his attention to Joy.
"Everything is good. We will let you know if something changes. Your father, as you know, was a good man. He made sure we were always taken care of, even as we took care of him." Again, she did her best to keep from crying. Shawn hugged her, feeling a surge of thankfulness and doing his best not to cry himself. Joy set off to continue her work. Antonio, the main chef, popped his head out of the kitchen. He was over 6 feet tall, with a head full of thick, dark waves. "Get in here, boys!" "Antonio!" Shawn exchanged high fives with him. "Man, is it good to see you. Last time I was here, you were on vacation. How was it?" Antonio was from Spain, and though he'd left there nearly a decade ago, his accent was as strong as if he'd just arrived to America yesterday. "My family was so happy to see me that they're all moving here." "Oh, that's such great news. Yes, they will be buying a house about an hour or so from here. It will be nice to see them more often." Looking embarrassed, he quickly added, "So sorry about your dad, Mr. Shawn. He was a good man, so good to all of us." Yes, he was. "Corey, you take good care of this guy, huh? And make sure that the new girl does too." "You too? Is there anybody who doesn't know?" Shawn said. "Probably not. I'm sorry." Antonio patted his arm. "You tell me what your stomach needs." "Oh no, I'm okay." "Nonsense. You are not allowed to step into this kitchen without leaving on a full stomach." Corey raised his eyebrows at Shawn and shrugged. "Guess we better comply." Antonio and his main assistant, David, served them plates stacked high with fluffy pancakes and crispy bacon. David poured them each a glass of orange juice, leaving the carafe in the middle of the table. David joined the family around the same time as Samantha. He tended to be on the shy side, so he usually said very little. He was also probably the youngest of them all, at 25 years old. "David, how have you been?" Shawn asked him as he took a piece of bacon. "Very well, Mr. Shawn. How are you?"
I've seen better days. Looking deeply concerned, David asked if the food was okay. Shawn glanced at his plate and chuckled. Oh yes, everything's fine. I just meant the news. Looking relieved, David nodded. Yes, I tried not to listen, but it's hard when they keep replaying it every hour. They do? Shawn felt his body stiffen. Yes. So sorry. I thought you knew. It's none of our business, and now they've made it ours. It's not your fault, David. He smiled to assure him, though the irritation toward the media continued to fester. Hey, do we get to meet that new puppy of yours? I'll try to bring her around next time. Good. Enjoy your meal. David smiled and left. Man, we should come here more often. Corey was busy devouring his pancakes. Shawn nodded absent-mindedly as he finished his food. He excused himself to go upstairs, which led to a single room, the game room. In the middle stood a pool table. His father had built-in wooden shelves along the walls and filled them with board games, movies, and books. He'd spent numerous days here with his dad, filling the mournful home with sounds of happiness after Shawn's mother passed away. The house waited for his orders. He wasn't ready to make any changes. Softly, he said, I miss you, Dad. Once he got to the bottom of the stairs, Shawn ran into Aaron waiting beside Corey, along with two other suited men, Chris and Toby, both on standby whenever one of the regular guards took vacation. Good to see you again, sir, they said almost simultaneously. Mr. Shawn, are you ready? Aaron suggested. He nodded. After they said their goodbyes, they all headed to parked cars. So, are you guys going to be with me 24/7? Shawn asked, already disliking the new arrangement, but still trying to convey his appreciation for the job they had to do. Do I have to wait for you to tell me where to go? Yes, we will be here at all times for your safety, Mr. Shawn. As for your travel, we are just here for the ride. Aaron and his men stood next to a dark, unmarked car, awaiting instructions. Feeling awkward about the constant presence, though knowing it was necessary for now, he turned to Corey. Let me call Shelly and see about meeting up. Aaron's right. She needs a warning, just in case the media decide to stalk her too. Sounds good to me. Corey stretched his arms and yawned. That gives me a chance to call Alana. Shawn pulled out his cell phone and typed in her number.
Shawn?
Shelly answered on the first ring.
You okay? I saw the news.
For reasons he didn't understand, Shelly seeing it made him uncomfortable and nervous. Oh, yeah, well, my life just got more interesting. Hey, can we meet somewhere? Corey's with me. Maybe Lana could join us.
Oh, okay.
She sounded surprised. Was she busy? Did she feel obligated to say yes? We could meet later if you have something to do.
Now is good.
She responded so quickly, he wondered if she really wanted to. After all, she must know that they would be lucky to find any kind of privacy now that his face was so well known. In fact, when they did meet up, he anticipated that she might decide to drop their relationship, whatever it had been, altogether. After all, what kind of woman would want a guy whose life was on display?
Chapter 16. Shelly was surprised to hear from Shawn, especially since his life had drastically changed overnight. She figured he'd be preoccupied with business affairs, but to be honest, she was more than thrilled to hear from him. She'd been unable to stop thinking about their day on the beach. She closed her eyes and prayed. Lord, help me to use good judgment, to trust what you have in store for me. Lana was on her way to pick Shelly up. The two of them would be meeting the men at a coffee shop in Malibu. Shawn insisted that they come to them, but Shelly countered that he'd gone out of his way enough and that it was time she came to him. Knock, knock! Lana called through the front open window. Shelly grabbed her keys. Coming! She hopped into Lana's passenger seat. Lana drove an old Chevy pickup. So, is there a particular reason why we're meeting? Lana asked as she drove down the highway. I don't think so. I guess just to hang out. And the news has nothing to do with it? Why? What would that have to do with me? Lana cleared her throat, a little too loudly. If you're going to continue down this road of love, then obviously things are going to change. For one, say goodbye to privacy. Shelly turned quiet. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. She never had to worry about going anywhere before. Let's just see what's going on once we get there. I agree, Shelly mumbled. When they finally arrived, Shelly was glad to find that the guys were already inside. Shawn stood up as she got to the table and kissed her on the cheek. She felt herself blush. Lana and Corey were quick to embrace and kiss right on the mouth as they all took their seats beside each other. As though he expected something to happen, Shawn kept glancing around. She noticed, too, that his leg was shaking under the table. Are you okay? Shelly asked him. His shoulders heave.
I assume you saw the news.
Yeah. Is that what's bothering you?
That and the media storming my property this morning.
Oh, no. Now he looked at her, though his leg continued to jiggle.
I stopped by my dad's estate, and it seems necessary for me to have protection now.
So you have bodyguards here?
Yeah. You didn't notice?
He smiled at her. She glanced around the shop, not noticing the presence of any bodyguard.
You have to look really hard.
He nodded over near the back of the room, then to a tree outside.
And see that guy near the front door?
Oh, wow. It's like they blend in with everyone else. I didn't even see them there.
That's the idea.
He swallowed, apparently unwilling to say what was next on his mind. As perceptive as ever, Corey took the opportunity to excuse himself, along with Lana, and the two of them escaped to another table. Shawn cleared his throat.
I brought you here to talk about that. Before you arrived, 3 different people asked for my autograph. I'm not used to that. I have only ever lived near celebrities. I've never been one.
How do you feel about that? He seemed taken aback.
How do you feel about it?
Now she knew what it was that made him act nervous. This new world. He didn't have a choice. But she did.
I understand if you want out. I mean, all this attention, the paparazzi, the bodyguards. You'll probably show up in the news, too.
She placed her hand over his. I'm not going anywhere. Her heart jumped as she said the words, but she wasn't into playing games, and she saw how he needed her reassurance. A flash of light seemed to ignite and grow in Shawn's damp eyes. As he squeezed her hand, a shiver ran through her, tingling from her toes right up to the base of her skull, where her thoughts began to buzz erratically to the unsteady patter of her heart. Shawn? His face suddenly became tense. Shelly turned to the voice behind her. A woman, about her age, stood there. She had bright green eyes and beautiful straight hair that was probably the envy of many women. She looked overly thrilled to see Shawn. Was she here for an autograph? Poor Shawn. He couldn't even grab a cup of coffee without someone bothering him. When Shelly looked back at him, she noticed he didn't look happy to see this woman. I thought I might find you here. I remembered it was your favorite place to distress. So obviously not here for an autograph. Who was this woman? And why did Shawn seem upset at seeing her?
Why are you here?
Shawn said. The woman acted unfazed and squeezed into the space right next to him. I came to see that you're okay. You've become quite the overnight sensation. Her eyes twinkled as she tousled his hair. Shawn averted his gaze from the woman and sunk into his seat as though trying to disappear. Shelly simultaneously wished that this overzealous woman would leave, while wondering why she acted like she knew him so well. Shawn still clung to Shelly's hand, but the woman didn't seem to care as she grabbed his other hand and purred, practically right into his ear. You didn't return my call. I know we had a rough patch, but I'm still here for you, whenever you're ready. With that, she let go of his hand. She didn't even glance Shelly's way as she left the building. Shawn let go of her hand. His face had turned pale. He seemed wiped out.
I'm sorry for bringing you here.
Before she could ask who the mysterious woman was, Corey and Lana returned to the table. Corey appeared particularly annoyed.
What gall!
Who was that? Lana wondered. Shelly was glad someone was asking since she was having trouble getting the words out herself. Bridget, he mumbled. Ah, that explained the awkwardness. Did he still have feelings for Bridget? It had only been a few months since she'd left. Sometimes it took a while to get past certain feelings. She knew that personally. It was only recently that she'd been able to stop thinking about Rick, that she'd been able to fully let go. Oh my gosh! I think that's the guy on the cover of People. A cohort of young women spilled into their space, bumping into the table and making coffee slosh out of their cups. Hey, aren't you that guy with the puppy who saved the old woman? A girl who couldn't have been more than 18 pushed through the rest of the women, her bright pink purse sliding down her arm. She was holding out a small notebook. Would you mind signing my book? Shawn tried to avert his attention from them, forcing his gaze on his coffee. Clearly, he could not turn invisible no matter how hard he tried. Then a big arm blocked the girl from getting any closer.
Ma'am, please step back. Let the man enjoy his coffee in peace. He is not here to do autographs. Thank you.
To Shelly's amazement, the girl's bottom lip actually popped out, and with her two friends, the pouty girl left.
You all right?
The man asked Shawn, whose hands were tightly clutched around his cup.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron.
Aaron retreated.
That's my bodyguard. Well, one of them.
He joked, though it was obvious Shawn was not in a happy mood.
Maybe we'll try this again later next week. Hopefully by then things will have calmed down.
Sure, Shelly told him, unsure what else to say, but unable to ignore the disappointment that stirred within her. In Lana's truck, Shelly tried not to think about what had just transpired, but that was virtually impossible. It was all she could think about. Did you see the way Bridget draped herself over him? Who's Bridget? Lana asked. That woman, the one who just walked right up to our table and started fawning over him. That just about describes all the women that came over there. He asked her to marry him 6 months ago. She rejected him. Oh, Lana's voice softened. I don't like her. You should have seen it. She acted like they still had something. But they don't. I mean, he's clearly into you, Shelly. Yeah, she chewed on her lip. But what if he's not entirely over her? I can't go through that again. Just let him process it all. I mean, it's not like he's used to this either, you know. Yeah, you're right. After Lana dropped Shelly off, she found herself exhausted, as though she'd run home. It bothered her that she didn't know how Shawn felt. On the beach, they seemed so in sync, both of them obviously enjoying each other's company. But now, she wasn't sure what to think. Bridget's presence had done something to him. It had opened a door that he'd supposedly shut. She tried concentrating on Lana's advice, to give it time, but negative thoughts kept poking through. Her brain swung back and forth between doubts about her future with Shawn and reprimands over even thinking about a future with him. What makes me so special? I mean, he can obviously have any woman he wants. She flinched at the possibility. A whole week went by, and Shawn didn't call. Shelly couldn't put herself out there. She knew she wouldn't be able to take any more rejection. Unfortunately, she was caught up on all the work for her charity, so she couldn't use that to preoccupy her mind. Hoping to fix her thoughts elsewhere, she flipped on the TV in search of a comedy. Instead, she stopped on the news station. There was an image of Shawn trying to duck from the cameras as a plethora of women, some of them as old as 50, surrounded him. It appears that Mr. Henderson is a bit on the shy side, ladies. The anchorwoman looked pleased. Another image popped into the screen, this one showing him signing something for a woman wearing, of all things, a fur coat. He was actually smiling as he signed his name. The doorbell buzzing jolted her out of this strange new world. She opened the door.
Hey, sis.
Brandon.
How are things going with Shawn, now that he's a superstar?
I don't know. Her voice broke a little as the door shut. Was that a metaphor for the end of their relationship, too?
Have you been crying?
Have I? He grabbed a tissue from the kitchen counter and wiped her cheeks.
That bad, huh?
What? Lovesick. Ugh, no. I don't know. He jerked his arm toward the TV. They're a dime a dozen. Don't let them bother you. He doesn't seem to mind. This doesn't sound like you. Brandon. I haven't heard from him in a week. She sniffed. I don't even know why I care. I do, because you really care about him. She couldn't argue that. She just wished it weren't the truth. His ex-fiancée interrupted us last week. Brandon seemed surprised. When was he engaged? Well, actually, he asked her to marry him and she rejected him. So she shows up at the coffee shop falling all over him. How did he react? He seemed uncomfortable. That's good, right? I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that women are after his money. You did see the gold diggers earlier. Yeah, but maybe it's just because he realized he wasn't over her. Brandon gave her a funny look. Why would you say that? Because she said he didn't return her call. Brandon, he never told me that she called him. Why would he hide that unless he didn't want me to know? Maybe he forgot, or maybe he didn't want you to know because it doesn't mean anything to him. That's what Rick told me, that she didn't mean anything. Shelly. She sighed. I know. He's not Rick, I guess. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to make us some dinner. What would you like? She shrugged. Okay, steak and potatoes it is. She smiled. It was her favorite kind of meal. But I don't have any steak, just a puny little potato. Hamburgers? Yeah, I do have some of those. See if there's a good movie on, he said. She settled on the couch and switched channels until she came to some silly comedy. That smells good, she called to him. Well done, just like you like it. She fell into the couch and felt most of the tension leave her body. She must have fallen asleep because Brandon had to nudge her to see that there was a plate on a wooden tray in front of her. Oh, wow, Brandon. Where did you find these? Mom gave them to me the other day. She still had them in the garage from before the divorce. Thought I'd bring them over for old time's sake. Oh, this is great. She bit into her hamburger. Tasty. Oh, I love this movie. Isn't this the one we used to watch with Mom and Dad? Yeah. They ate in silence, laughing at all the same parts. It was a nice break from the news. Feel better? He asked her as he helped clean the dishes. I do. Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for everything. He stuck the silverware in the dish drainer cup and slung his arm over her shoulder. That's what big brothers are for. Give me a call later in the week. I will. She shut the door after him. She started searching for another movie to watch when she landed on the news. It couldn't be an accident. This time Bridget was on air. She was being interviewed by the same woman who hounded Shawn on the beach. It was a recording from earlier in the day, maybe even on the same beach. Bridget was glowing as she spoke eagerly into the microphone. Yes, we're engaged. It's like a dream come true. We've known each other for years. She flashed her left hand in front of the cameras, showing off a big, fat princess diamond. He's taken, girls. Her smile grew as large as the ring. Shelly's heart sank. She wobbled to the couch and quickly shut down the TV. Then she leaned her head against the armrest and cried. She never planned on liking him this much, but it couldn't be helped. Now it all made sense, why he hadn't contacted her in over a week. She tried to swallow, but her intake of air got stuck over the large lump that was lodged in her throat. It was dark. She was all alone. Unlovable. If Brandon were here, he'd be chastising her for her thoughts. But what else could she think? Her cell phone lit up. Lana was FaceTiming. With a shaky breath, she whispered into the phone a weak, "Hello?" That's her, isn't it? The one who rejected him. Lana spat out the words with disgust. Yes. Don't move, I'm heading over there. Shelly's head was pounding. No, please. I'm getting a headache. I just need to be alone right now. Besides, I have no right to feel like this. He didn't promise me anything. Shelly, yes, you do, she protested. I saw how he treated you. There wasn't anyone else for him. Well, it sure doesn't explain this bit of news, does it? He hasn't called me in over a week. I'm sure he just didn't want to hurt my feelings. He didn't even bother telling me that she'd called him. I know what it's like to be lied to. I've been such a fool. She shook her head at Shelly. Maybe it's not what you think. Maybe you should call him. Look, I think I just need to go to sleep. I'll talk to you soon. She ended their FaceTime. Her Bible was sitting next to her on the nightstand. As she opened the book, she ran her fingers across the pages of Philippians. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. She cried softly at first, then harder as she thought about Shawn, and she couldn't think about him without thinking about all those women fawning over him, without thinking about Bridget. She held the Bible to her chest and prayed. God, please help me to be okay, to know that you are with me, that you will never leave me. She sniffed, the tears dripping down her cheeks. Looking over the verse again, she felt her body relax, then her mind, and finally her heart, as she fell asleep. Chapter 17.
At his computer, Shawn opened up the folder labeled The Unintentional Romance. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he continued Carrie's love story. She and the mysterious stranger were bridging the gap, becoming closer with each chapter, and meeting at the most interesting places. After the airport, they saw each other again at the car rental place. From there, they ran into each other at an amusement park, then a circus. He was 20 more pages in when he got stuck. The guy, Brian, couldn't seem to get over this girl from his past. Carrie wasn't having it, and she refused to answer his calls. At the back window that Shawn had left partly open, Zuzu snored. She looked peaceful. Shawn missed that feeling. Just beyond the window, Toby stood guard. Aaron and Chris were on standby. Basically, whenever he went out in public, two of them joined him, while the third kept watch on the house, especially after the swarms of women that continued to bombard him. He'd also been attacked by a mob of women as he came out of the mall. Thankfully, Aaron and Toby managed to pry them off before it got too out of control. But Shawn was more annoyed that he couldn't go anywhere without being followed by someone. A few days before that, a member of the paparazzi apparently miffed that Shawn's bodyguards were blocking him from snapping a picture of Shawn, started cursing him out. And if that weren't enough, he'd been misquoted in the papers today, affirming that he was indeed engaged to Bridget. Frowning, he saved the document and entered into another folder. He clicked on the one labeled Pictures. A smattering of photos popped up on the screen, some images as far back as 10 years ago. But he wasn't interested in the distant past. He froze when he spotted the file. It was a condensed folder that held memories of Bridget and him. He was furious with her after that stunt she'd pulled on the news today. But that hadn't been the worst of his week. Not hearing from Shelly was the worst part of it all. She said she'd call, and she hadn't. He thought back to their last conversation. Then he smacked his forehead. She'd never said any such thing. In fact, he was the one who suggested they wait until things calmed down. And now what must she think of him? With the folder opened, he scrolled through until he found the last photo taken of Bridget and himself. They were posing on the beach, rolling waves behind them, the sun casting a golden hue over her long dark hair that encircled them as they embraced one another. He'd never trusted anyone as much as he trusted her. He exited out of the folder, drew in a deep breath, and released it as he tried to calm his quickening pulse. The ocean caught his eye, the same ocean in the picture. Now, the waves withdrew from the shore, no couple embracing. The beach was practically barren. He decided to go for a walk, alerting Toby, who kept a close distance. As Shawn neared the shore, he stopped to pick up a tiny shell that had sunk into the wet sand. In his palm, the tiny sliver of what remained of the shell glimmered like a polished pearl. Bridget adored pearls. They were her favorite. He bought her a pearl necklace weeks before he proposed. She became so ecstatic about the necklace, He was confident she would accept his hand in marriage.
"Oh, Shawn, I can't believe this is for me. It's so beautiful."
Her smile grew as wide as her sparkling green eyes. He had never spent this much on a present before. She was worth it. But when he kneeled on one knee, his heart knocking nervously, she laughed so hard, giggles exploded from her like an uncontrollable spasm. He rose, embarrassed and confused, stuffing the ring back into his pocket. When she finished her laughing fit, her wet green eyes penetrated his, her lips pulled back with a glib tightness. And he understood he would endure even more humiliation, yet he could not move or look away from her.
"Shawn, you don't impress me. I mean, you barely make enough to live in Malibu. How am I supposed to have a satisfactory lifestyle if we're just barely making it?"
She'd grown quiet, a look of satisfaction on her face, something he'd never seen on her before.
"Besides, I found someone else, someone who has real money, who will spoil me with whatever my heart desires."
She smirked.
"Something you could never do."
And now she'd convinced everyone that they were engaged. He kicked at the sand, feeling his temperature rise. Unable to enjoy the beach, he brushed past Toby, who resumed his former post. Shawn went straight to the computer where he deleted any and all pictures that had Bridget in them. He didn't want to be reminded of her ever again. He picked up his phone and dialed Shelly. It rang several times before going to voicemail. "This is Shawn. Please call me." An hour passed with him just pacing around the house praying. "Lord, please give me the right words to say. Please show her the truth, that Bridget is a phony, and I have no feelings for anybody but Shelly." He checked his phone to make sure he hadn't accidentally silenced it, but the ringer was all the way up. A picture of his dad and him was pinned to the fridge by a magnet. He stared at it for a moment. It had been months since he'd visited Value Cinema. He'd barely been able to bring himself to return to his dad's house until recently. But the business was his responsibility now, too. How had he let that fact slide? It was just around noon back in Baltimore. He dialed his Uncle Joel. He answered on the first ring, his voice deep and broad as usual. "Hey, Shawn, enjoying your superstar status?" "Hardly. I just saw the news that you and Bridget are getting married after all. I thought..." "No, that's a lie. She manipulated the papers." He groaned. "Oh, sorry to hear that. I had no idea." Shawn changed the subject. "How's the business going? It slipped my mind. I feel like a dope." "Have you seen how much has been going on in your life? Anyone would forget. Don't worry. I let them know that you were on hiatus, though it's about time you checked in." "Uncle Joel, I appreciate that. Thank you." "Of course. Do you know what your plans are with the company?" "Based on the will, all of the same associates are still employed, which I don't plan to change. Dad said they were good workers, trustworthy. But me? A CEO? Not sure what to do about that." "It will work out, one day at a time. That's all you can do." "You're right. Thanks, Uncle Joel. I'll talk to you later." They ended the call. Shawn's dad used to take him behind the scenes when he was a child. That was before DVDs, when the VHS tapes were still the hot commodity. Now, with online streaming, he knew his dad must have done something right to keep the business alive. Value Cinema was the only hybrid business that he knew of, offering both streaming and in-store rentals. That fact alone could keep business booming. He stepped into the spare bedroom where he kept personal files and dug through one of the folders until he came across the accounting information for the movie store. Back in the living room, he placed the folder on the high glass table and logged into his personal banking account. He hadn't checked on it in weeks. Blood rushed into his head as he stared at the zeros. There were so many of them. 9 zeros. He sat down, suddenly lightheaded. He felt uneasy with all of this money. He hadn't earned any of it. But his dad entrusted it to him. He had to honor that. He exited out of the website. Zuzu lazily padded into the room and uttered a soft whimper. "It's okay, girl. I'll be back soon." She lowered her head for him to scratch. "Be back soon." Grabbing the folder, he alerted Toby that he'd be heading out. Minutes later, Aaron and Chris came to get Shawn in the unmarked car, while Toby kept watch in the house. Value Cinema looked as busy as it did back before streaming was available. "Wait here." Aaron got out from behind the wheel and surveyed the area. He radioed into Chris. "Cap and sunglasses." "What's going on?" Shawn asked. "We're going to escort you to the office. Christy, the manager, will meet you there, but we're taking the back way." He handed Shawn a hat and dark sunglasses. "Wear these until we get inside." He put them on, looking warily about as he exited the vehicle, the folder tucked under his arm. No media, no cohort of women. Indeed, nobody paid him any mind. The disguise was obviously working. A minute later, Chris and Aaron ushered him into the office.
"Shawn Henderson, is that you?"
Christy squinted at him.
"They told me you were coming by."
She was close to his father's age, and she wore a dark-sleeved suit that complemented her stick-straight brown hair that was tucked just behind her ears. "Oh?" He removed the disguise and placed them on his desk. "Hi, Christy." She smiled.
"How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help with the transition?"
He opened the folder, spreading the worksheets across the desk. She leaned over to study the papers. "Look at these numbers. I've never seen so many." She looked at him.
"As terrible as the media has been, they have actually helped business. Now that people know that you run the place, sales have doubled."
He gasped. "I had no idea." She beamed at him.
"Your dad would be proud. I know that we are. Do you plan to keep this place?"
Her forehead crinkled with a little bit of worry. I have always loved it here." He peeped through the one-way window, watching all of the activity. He had never seen the place as packed as it was. It's been surreal. I haven't really been able to think about it.
"We're behind you, whatever you decide to do."
He turned to Christy. "Thanks. That means a lot."
"I hope you don't mind me asking, but is what you said true? You and Bridget are getting married?"
He grumbled. "No, not at all."
"Oh."
She looked confused. Just the media's way of twisting things. He had to get a hold of Shelly. She hadn't called him back. But could he blame her? He could only imagine all of the things that she must be thinking after the news poisoned the truth. Anxious to speak to her, he said goodbye to Christy and followed Aaron and Chris back to the car. On the drive to his home, he tried once more to get a hold of Shelly, but she didn't pick up. "Shelly, it's me, Shawn. We really need to talk. Please call as soon as you can." He stared at the phone, strumming his fingers nervously on the window. He hoped it wasn't too late. A few minutes later, they arrived at Malibu Colony. He quickly let himself inside. Zuzu greeted him, pawing at his pants leg. He laughed and ruffled her fur. Then he dialed Corey. "Dude, what's going on? I just saw the news. Tell me you're not seriously considering marrying that. You know she just wants you for your money. She's bad news. You can't trust her. She's..." "No, I'm not. I never said those things." Of course, in the end, all she'd ever wanted was money. Just like the gold diggers. But Shelly wasn't like the others. She didn't treat him any differently once she'd learned about the money he'd come into. And she had never laughed at him. She was real. She was good. Shawn heard the desperation in his voice, but he didn't care. "Corey, I need to see Shelly, please. Get her to come over here, even if that means you and Lana are with her. She won't answer my calls." "Oh, man. She probably thinks you and Bridget..." "Sure, of course. We'll get her over there. Don't you worry." He hung up. The thought that he may have lost Shelly made him feel sick in his heart, and he actually felt it crash against his chest. His breaths came too fast. He had to sit down. "God, please be with me. Give me direction. Give me comfort." He put a hand to his head, suddenly feeling tired. He desperately needed a nap. As his head hit the pillow, he felt his whole body tense as he thought about the money. As strange as it probably sounded, the money made him feel oppressed, restless. Finally, he fell asleep. But he kept waking up, plagued by stress about what to do with the business, the money. He fell asleep again, but nightmares attacked him, everyone looking at him with dollar signs in their eyes. He sat straight up in bed, his breathing labored as though a great weight was pushing his body down. Sweating profusely, he turned the air conditioner up and made his way to the living room, over to his work chair. Gradually, his normal breathing restored itself, his heart calmed. He drew in a deep, slow breath and released it, feeling his whole body relax as it oscillated in the chair. Watching Toby monitor the grounds, 24-hour protection, he switched on the TV. There was a replay of the female mob ambush. He glanced at the magazine cover. Most desirable man alive. It was funny. He had more people surrounding him these days. More people who knew him, who talked about him, who couldn't get enough of him. But he had never felt more alone.
Chapter 18. A banging on the door jolted Shelly out of sleep. Huffing, she slid out of bed and slowly stomped to the front door. "He wants to see you," Lana said as she came in, accompanied by Corey. Shelly glanced at the clock. "Well, at least you let me sleep in until 8 this time." Lana giggled and slapped her on the shoulder. Shelly placed her hands on her hips and glared at Corey. "He put you up to this, didn't he?"
"He had no choice. You haven't been answering his calls."
"I can't." She quickly looked away so they wouldn't see the hurt in her eyes. "There's nothing to talk about, not after the engagement news." She bit back tears, annoyed at how her voice quivered. "I can't go through this again." Lana put a hand on her arm and said gently, "Hey, just see what he has to say, okay? Maybe it's not what you think." Part of her didn't want to face the possibility that it was all true, that he was back with Bridget. But another part of her needed to know for sure. It was torture, not knowing. She nodded and went to get dressed. When they got there, Shelly found herself admiring the beautiful home. It wasn't trying to compete with the other homes. It was simple, with smallish windows, soft teal colors, and a modest lawn. A house that resonated with humility and charity, like Shawn. But in front of the beautiful home, she was shocked to see the media practically patrolling the streets. "What are they doing here?" Shelly asked. Lana shook her head, her lips curled in irritation. "Brood of vipers." Shelly spun toward her, choking out a laugh. "Nice time to quote scripture." Lana shrugged and started for the front door, but Corey pulled her back.
"Hold on."
He got on the phone in a covert kind of manner, covering his mouth. Lana suppressed a smile and whispered into his ear, "This isn't Mission Impossible." He winked at her.
"Hey, dude, we're here. What do you want us to do? Can we—" "Oh, got it."
He ended the call. "What was that all about?" Lana asked.
"He's sending out one of his bodyguards."
"Ooh, now we're talking." Shelly shook her head at her friend. "You're enjoying this a little too much." Inside, though, her heart ticked like a bomb. For a while, she'd wished she had never opened herself up again. But now, all she kept hoping was that the news article was wrong, because as much as she didn't want to admit it to herself, she had already fallen for Shawn Henderson.
"Oh, man. Looks like it's going to rain."
Corey stared at the sky that was populated with big, puffy clouds. As if on cue, a snap of thunder tore open the heavens, and big fat raindrops began to fall, turning rapidly into hard rain. A few seconds later, a couple of men in dark suits hurried toward Shelly and her friends. The media tried to press in on them as they darted across the street. Just as they were almost to the door, someone shouted, "Shelly!" Without thinking, she turned. One of the reporters shoved a microphone toward her. "Are you the mysterious woman that Shawn Henderson's been seeing? Are you the one trying to break up his engagement to Bridget?" Shelly's heart thudded uncontrollably. It was such a horrible thing to say. But what if it was true? Had she come between them? What was she doing here anyway? She looked back at the car, wanting to leave. She looked at her hands. They were trembling and splotched with fresh tears. "Oh God, I'm such a fool. Please just help us get out of here."
"Back off."
She turned to see Shawn. Through blurry eyes, through the thickening curtain of rain, she saw him throw a menacing look at the reporter as he hurried Shelly away. One of the suited men escorted Corey and Lana, while the others worked on shooing away the reporters. Shawn led them to the back of his house, where several tall bushes blocked the property. How were they going to get inside from here? But then Shawn pushed through one of the taller shrubs. A secret doorway, just like Mission Impossible, Lana whispered from behind them as they filed through the back door. A moment later, they were all safely inside the house, dripping water all over the floor.
I'm so sorry about the paparazzi. They're everywhere.
Shawn sounded truly upset. He left the room, and Shelly thought he might not return. But then he came back with a stack of towels and handed them out to everyone.
Again, I'm really sorry.
It's not your fault, Shelly murmured, drying off her hair. She was still unsure if she should even be here, finding herself looking at Shawn only from the corner of her eye, afraid, too afraid to find rejection there.
It's kind of a risk to visit me these days. Can I get you guys something to drink? That would be great. I'll help.
Corey and Shawn headed to the kitchen, while Shelly and Lana took a seat at the dinette. Lana looked around. I wonder where the laser beams are. In spite of her nerves, Shelly laughed. Lana smirked. Laughter is good medicine.
Ladies.
Corey presented them with sparkling waters and took a seat next to his girlfriend, which left the fourth seat right beside Shelly. Shawn hesitated. Better get this over with. Please, sit down, she told him. He flashed a small smile as he joined them. She noticed he hadn't poured himself a drink. She also noticed that his hands were slightly shaking. She knew what that felt like. Corey slapped his hands together.
So, maybe meeting here wasn't such a good idea.
Chapter 19.
He couldn't believe it. Shelly was more beautiful than ever. Her face radiated with warmth and gentleness. It was evident that she felt the impact of the stress and uncertainty. The way her eyes slightly drooped and her lips turned down a bit, she was worn out, desperate for all of this to be over. He knew that because when he gazed into her face, he felt his own pain. He wanted to talk to her, tell her what he was feeling, that he wiped his forehead and loosened his shirt. That solitary word, love, would change everything. What if she didn't feel the same way? What if what had started had already ended, and she just wanted out? We're gonna go hang out in your game room. Corey patted Shawn's shoulder. Zuzu took that moment to bound into the kitchen and hop into Corey's leg. And we're taking this little girl with us. She scurried after them, barking excitedly as the three of them made their way toward the west side of the house. The unease felt heavier than before, now that they were alone. He rose from the chair and started to scoot to the chair opposite her, when her hand touched his.
Please don't. It's okay. I want you next to me.
He sat back down and stared into her eyes that were colored as beautifully as the ocean God created. He didn't want to look away. Her wet hair appeared almost brown, and it stuck to the sides of her face, as though it were framing her beauty. There was so much he wanted to say, to do, to reassure her. He decided it was best to get right to the point, to clear any confusion. It's not true. That's all that came out. She waited patiently, her slim fingers partially curled on the table. He cleared his throat. That stuff on the news, what I supposedly said, none of it ever happened. Well, sort of. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened. He needed to speak more quickly. What I mean is, Bridget did try to get me back, but I made it clear to her that there was nothing between us. He swallowed, his body tensing with nervousness. And I told her that my heart was with you. Her mouth fell open more, and he heard her gasp, the tension in her face easing. He tossed aside the fear that washed over him, and he took her hand in his and fixed his eyes on hers. Shelly, you're the one for me, just you. I've missed you. My life has been in chaos, yes, because of my wealth, but it's also been in chaos because I don't have you. I haven't been able to sleep well. I've hardly eaten. Trying to keep track of my dad's business has been a nightmare. I don't even know what I'm doing. He was rambling, he knew that, but all of it had been inside for too long, and he couldn't stop it from gushing out. There were tears in her eyes. Had he said the wrong thing? Did she not feel the same way? Was she about to laugh?
Shawn,
she said, his name sounding so soft on her lips that he almost thought he was dreaming it.
I'm sorry for ever believing any of it. I guess I didn't know what to think, especially when you didn't call me for a while. And when you did, I was too afraid to know the truth.
There were tears running down her cheeks. He brushed them with the tips of his fingers. Her face felt soft. She was so lovely. She stared at him, the tears mixing together the blues and grays of her eyes in an endearing symphony. He moved his fingers to her chin, tipping it up just a little as he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss felt slow and sweet and short. When he pulled away, the pain and confusion had vanished from her eyes, and she was smiling at him, and as cheesy and romantic as it sounded, he felt his heart sing.
Chapter 20. 3 months later. Shawn, this is my brother Brandon. They sat at a table in the back of Spilling the Beans, what was now both Shawn's and Shelly's favorite coffee place. With all of their busy schedules, they had finally managed to find some downtime to get together so her brother could meet Shawn. It was hard not to notice how Brandon practically stumbled over himself as he shook his hand. He still hadn't managed to sit down yet.
It's such an honor to meet you, and I don't mean because of the money. I mean because of your books. I love your books. They are so cool, so amazing, so...
Brandon, let yourself breathe. Shelly winked at him. He quickly stepped back, his face turning a little red. Sit down. He promptly sat. Shawn said,
Thank you, Brandon. I'm glad you're a fan. What would you say if I told you I was getting ready to publish a romance?
Brandon grimaced. Shelly and Shawn laughed. The news eventually stopped plastering Shawn's face everywhere, and though he still had his bodyguards in sight, Shelly didn't have to worry as much about the women fawning over him, especially Bridget. Just a couple of months ago, Bridget had been interviewed about her so-called engagement. Unable to keep up the lie, she had panicked, her words fumbling about as she confessed that she had made it up. The media got a kick out of her response. Magazines covered the interview with headlines like, "Crazy ex-girlfriend is caught in a lie." I think the media grew bored with you because of me, Shelly said as she sipped on her first full cup of coffee. Being with Shawn changed a few things in her life. He had a bit of an impact on her. For one, the coffee drinking. And then there was the love of sci-fi. They must have watched dozens of movies in the past few months. All of them sci-fi. She even read all of his book series.
It's about time, sis,
Brandon cracked when she told him. Hello! Misty rushed in, her red hair now down to her shoulders and flying in the wind. She and Shelly had met back when the whole publicity nightmare had fizzled out. Shelly liked her like she was a sister. Misty was fiercely protective of Shelly as much as she was of Shawn. What did I miss? They all looked at her in confusion. Oh, come on! Don't make me beg. Carrie, what did she say?
Carrie and Brian finally got over their fears and ended up together.
Shawn said, Yes! She searched around the table, her eyes wild. Well, where is it? Brandon looked terrified, like he thought she would lunge at him at any minute. He'd met her only once before, and he was still a little wary of her energy. Shawn handed Misty the thumb drive. She held it to her chest and heaved a long sigh. Oh, finally! Your very first romance! I wonder how it compares to... She looked pointedly at Shelly and Shawn with a big smile glued to her face. Shelly felt her cheeks burn. Oh, hey! What about a pen name? What did you decide?
No pen name, Misty. Just use my real name.
Oh, now, I think that's perfect. She leaned forward suddenly. Brandon sunk back in his seat, practically cowering, but Shelly couldn't help but notice a rosy hue coloring his cheeks. Apparently, he had a little crush on Misty. Yes, Shelly said. We figured the world's ready to hear that he's the one behind the romance. True, Misty said. They have published nothing lately, but the two of you looking at each other all starry-eyed, his romance novel will fit, so perfectly. Shawn grinned at Shelly.
I think you're right. The media is getting bored. They saw us together and knew there was nothing they could do to change our story.
He took her hand and kissed the top of it. Then he checked his watch.
You ready?
Guess we'll see you later, Misty chirped, then winked at Brandon. Shelly stifled a laugh as her brother's entire face turned red. Sidekicks for Soldiers was having another major affair. The number of dogs had grown exponentially. People from all over Southern California brought various breeds of dogs. Some even came as far as the East Coast. It was unbelievable, and Shelly's head was still swimming from the shock of it all. On that rainy day, when the paparazzi swarmed her on her first visit to Shawn's, Shelly had unwillingly found her own special bite of fame. Her face of surprise appeared on the cover of several magazines. She'd looked like a drunk clown. The headline read, "Mystery Woman Tries to Steal Shawn Away." Of course, in that moment, she'd been pretty upset. She was forced to find new routes home and hide her face when she went out shopping. But then as the weeks went by, her sudden infamy turned into something more favorable. Online, she became a sort of celebrity for a while, when the charity brought in some of Hollywood's own celebrities, many who spread the good word. She and Lana definitely had their hands full. Shelly ended up hiring a few more people to run things. Today, Lana was in charge of the event. Shelly had made her a partner of the charity. And Shelly was now ready to be a part of that documentary that Hollywood had been craving. In the meantime, though, she and Shawn had other business to attend to. Shawn had made a few recent financial decisions that sort of changed some things. For one, he'd sold his home and moved back into his childhood home. He said it made him feel closer to his father. And now that the media knew where he lived, he felt safer in his parents' house, a place whose whereabouts no one really knew.
Here we are.
Shawn helped Shelly out of her car. The sky was unusually cloudy for the middle of summer. On the way here, it had started to drizzle. But now the rain was coming down good and steady. Aaron led them quickly into Value Cinema, through the main office. Shawn said,
Christy, this is Shelly.
Hi, Shelly. Nice to meet you. Are you here for a tour? Shawn's eyes glimmered.
Actually, Christy, I've decided to keep Value Cinema.
Her face lit up. Oh, what good news!
And
he paused for a little dramatic effect.
I've decided to turn it into a small chain.
He shared his idea with Shelly earlier in the week after revealing how much of a burden the money felt to him. He wanted to renew those memories for people like him, who had grown up with these stories, to recreate that sense of excitement over finding the right movie, over new releases, over just interacting with people in person. But I wouldn't mind a tour, Shelly chimed in. Shawn threw her a big smile. She looped her arm through his. It was nice meeting you, Christy. You too. I hope to see more of you around here. In the main area of the store, the two of them wandered the aisles.
When was the last time you were here?
He asked her as she mindlessly took in the numerous Blu-rays and DVDs on the shelves. I think it's been a while. Sorry, I've been busy. He laughed.
You don't have to apologize to me.
He squeezed her hand. Even now, after dating for over 3 months, Shelly felt her skin tingle when he touched her. They came to a smaller enclosed area and she opened her mouth in shock. Oh my goodness! VHSs! There were several built-in shelves stacked with rental tapes. I don't believe it! She turned to him. Do people still rent them?
Believe it or not, they do.
She turned back to the movies. Oh, wow! That just brings back so many good memories.
Maybe we can make more good memories.
She looked back at him. What? Instead of explaining, he led her outside, where they stood just under the eave. The rain continued to come down steadily. Suddenly, Zuzu came running toward them, something small clamped between her teeth. Where did you come from? Shelly exclaimed. But Shawn seemed unsurprised. At his prompt, the puppy sat beside him, whining through the object, her wet tail wagging impatiently. Shawn stooped to retrieve a small red velvet box from her mouth. Slowly, he knelt on one knee, holding the box toward Shelly. Her heart thudded as she held her breath.
Shelly, I have never felt this way toward anyone before. Though we got off to an unusual start, You didn't give up. You trusted me, even when it was hard. You've been by my side when the world would have it otherwise."
He paused, then he took a deep breath and continued.
"I know it hasn't been that long, but you know me more than anyone else. You truly love me, and I love you as much as I loved my own parents."
He slowly opened the box and pulled out a white gold band with a large heart-shaped diamond in the center.
"Would you be my bride?"
Shelly smiled, her body trembling with joy as she let him slide the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I will." He rose to his feet, then he embraced her. She could feel his heart beneath hers. All was exactly as it should be. When they pulled apart, Zuzu crouched at their legs and wagged her tail. They both laughed and leaned down to scratch behind her ears. When they stood back up, Shelly stared into Shawn's eyes. "I love you." He took her hand.
"Just let me know whenever you're ready, and we'll set the date."
"How did Zuzu get here?" As if on cue, Lana appeared with Corey by her side. She strode right up to Shelly and grabbed her hand, a sharp intake of air freezing her grip. Oh, I'm so happy, so happy." She threw her arms around them both, squishing their faces into her wet shoulders.
"Congratulations, guys."
Corey smacked Shawn on the back, knocking a cough out of him, and kissed Shelly's hand.
"We're happy for you."
"And this little girl did such a good job protecting that ring on the way here." Lana ruffled her fur. To Shelly, she said, "Have you guys set a date?" Shelly glanced at Shawn and smiled. "Soon." "Hey, wait a minute, Lana. I thought you were supervising the event." Shelly said, "Kind of hard when it's raining. We had to cancel. I sent you a text, but..." She gestured to Shelly's ring finger. "I guess you've been preoccupied." "Oh, right." As if on cue, lightning lit up the parking lot. They all turned to watch as the rain streamed down the windows of Value Cinema.
"Hey, isn't that romance book of yours supposed to be published any day now?"
Corey asked.
"Yup, Misty's got it on pre-order." "So, how does it end, dude?"
Shawn glanced into Shelly's eyes.
"Happily ever after."
This has been The Reluctant Billionaire, a clean secret celebrity billionaire romance. Written by Cristina Ryan. Narrated by Amelia Mendez. Copyright 2019 and 2023 by Krista Wagner. Production copyright by Krista Wagner.